Chapter 190. Late at night. Silence. Waking up from a dream. Morning. The Shangmalian welcomed the last day of the first semester. The weather was good on Friday, and the sunlight brought a hint of warmth. Professor Cheong-si didn't talk about the difficult theoretical knowledge in the dual class anymore. She waited until all the students had gathered at Battle Hall 2, and then picked out a student from each branch to be the foreman. She then had the students line up in 4 rows, and then followed the foreman out of the battle hall. Last class. Professor Cheong-si was going to lead them to run around the outside of the castle. It was also to let these first-year students, who locked themselves in the castle all day long, breathe the air outside the castle and understand how big the castle was. Remember the website, Vipkanshu. Dake glanced at Ai Ma, Sarah, and so on his right. Ai Ma and Sarah's faces didn't look so good. It was already difficult for them to keep up with the running team. Now that they were picked to be foremen, wasn't that a public execution? Dake and the foreman on the far right of the House of Fools signaled to each other and slowed down their pace. The 4 columns moved forward at a relatively slow speed. Professor Cheong-si didn't rush them. The area outside the castle was unexpectedly vast, and all kinds of small buildings were scattered around. Some of the first-year students liked to look outside the castle, but not many of them actually went to the site. If they had the time, more people would choose to run directly to Traveller Street. "We're here." After a while, Professor Cheong-si stopped somewhere. The students followed her gaze and looked in the same direction. Then a 2-story building in the style of a Roman palace came into view. "What's that?" someone asked in surprise. Then a student who already knew answered, "That's the entrance to the underground city." The Shangmalian underground city was a multi-story structure like a large maze. The underground city refreshed monsters every other week, and was only open to some students from Friday noon to Sunday night. Most of the Shangmalian's core materials came from here, and it could be said that it was completely self-produced. Study, adventure, tool. These were the 3 indispensable elements in the daily life of the senior students. As a first-year student, he could only come into contact with learning. Next semester, your magical beasts teacher might bring you to the dungeon for a tour. Professor Cheong-si stopped there for about 10 minutes before he started moving again. "Let's continue." Thus, the students sighed and continued to run. The last class of the first semester of the first grade came to an end amidst the endless running laps. Dake managed to preserve his dignity as a noble by relying on his morning exercise to improve his stamina. He looked down at most of the students who were bent over and panting, further strengthening his determination to persevere in the morning exercise. Before the class ended, Professor Cheong-si talked about some safety matters during the holidays and then announced that the class was dismissed. At that moment, even though their legs were sore, the students instantly cheered. For students who had no concept of the length of the winter break, a 9-day break was simply too crazy. What's more, it included the Christmas ball. Even though the Christmas ball didn't have a hunting activity like the masquerade ball, everyone still had a Christmas stocking to look forward to. For them, who had already experienced a hunting event, the Christmas event with the element of a ball as the core was even more attractive. It was December 22nd, and there were only 2 days left before the Christmas ball on the night of the 24th. The focus was on a dance partner. This time the focus was on Christmas presents. The thought of not having a dance partner at the ball or not receiving any presents other than a stocking made them feel awkward. The little mage's gazes gradually sharpened. Next it was war. "Ouch, what's going on?" Dake touched his cheek and felt a stinging pain. Who was it who was using a sharp gaze to carve on his face? Unlike the other students, after the dual class ended, Dake went straight to the dorm to continue researching the fusion spell. Since he made a decisive breakthrough last night, the research became a little smoother. When it was almost midnight, he stopped to eat some takeout brought by the little fiend and immediately went out. He finally arrived at the dragon taming platform before Professor Claire set off. The dragon taming platform was located near the classroom dorm. Despite the name, it was actually a place similar to a helipad. When the professors entered and left the school, most of them would ride flying pets. Most of the professors' pets were their own magic elves, and a small number of them were like Claire, who had tamed real magic beasts. Claire's wyvern was a sub-dragon species with thin dragon blood. It was originally the mount of a small leader in the Demon King's army, but it later became her trophy. When Dake arrived at the dragon taming platform, Claire was saying goodbye to a few familiar professors. Therefore, he didn't approach but stood a little further away and watched. After this farewell, the next time they met would probably be during the summer vacation. Dake was a little sad. "Hey Dake." Dake suddenly became alert. He saw Claire waving her hand vigorously. He quickly smiled, raised his arm and waved vigorously. "Auntie Claire, goodbye." A strong wind blew. Soaring dragon cloud. Claire put on her goggles and flew into the sky on her wyvern. Professor Shi Erfu, who came to see her off, used the keycard in his hand to draw a circle, and a circular door appeared in the sky. Claire suddenly turned her head as she passed through the door, and her light brown hair fluttered in the wind, covering half of her face. Dark watched until her figure completely disappeared from his sight. Then he took a small step back and turned to leave. Since it wasn't a life and death separation, there was no need to be too sad. Yvette was alone and needed companionship. With Claire's addition, the Duke's mansion would be warmer. Every time Dake flipped through the Great Sage Daily, he didn't have to worry too much about news that was unfavorable to his mother. He quickly returned to the dorm and continued to immerse himself in perfecting the fusion spell. After another 2 hours, Dake finally came up with a fusion spell that looked decent. Phew! He drank a glass of apple juice to refresh himself, then quickly packed his things and went to the library. Panduola also had her own things to do, and this afternoon was the last chance before the Christmas ball. When he arrived at the library, Panduola said a few words to Ms. Bella beside her. She walked out of the counter under Ms. Bella's warm gaze and went to the laboratory with Dake. The corridor of the castle was still quiet. Dake curiously asked, "Senior, do you still have work?" Panduola shook her head. "I also have holidays, okay? I just came to accompany Ms. Bella." "Well, I'll wait for you." Dark scratched his head. He had a nagging feeling that if he prepared a Christmas present for Ms. Bella, Senior Pandora would be happier. They didn't have much time this time. After the two entered the laboratory, they immediately got to work. Under the guidance of Panduola, Dake first tested the fusion spell. After he felt that all the indicators were met, he began the experiment. The first half of the fusion spell was actually somewhat similar to the spell cage spell. Both required the creation of a magic elf card as a base. The essence of fusion was equivalent to using 2 or more magic guide fairies as the core material to refine a brand new magic guide fairy on the spot. It could be said that it was a type of on-the-spot creation. Therefore, using the fusion card required a huge amount of magic power. Therefore, there were very few people who used the fusion series of cards. Ordinary magisters would at most use fusion as an auxiliary method, not as a core method. The whole experiment started at 3 in the afternoon and lasted until 4:30. The experiment's results were not unexpected. It ended in failure. As he was already quite mentally prepared, Dake didn't feel discouraged. The summary of the experience and problem-solving after the experiment's failure was the focus of this afternoon. Dake definitely couldn't do these by himself. However, with the careful guidance of Panduola, everything went smoothly. An hour passed in the blink of an eye. Although Dake didn't fully understand, he had already taken notes of all the key points. Next, he had to rely on himself to continue reading books. He gradually relaxed and began to tidy up the remnants of the experiment. After tidying up, the two left the laboratory together. Dake originally wanted to invite Senior to a restaurant in Traveler Street for dinner, but Senior regretfully said that she had something to do in the evening. Therefore, the two went to the cafeteria. Under the meaningful smiles of the halfling chefs, They ordered a small table of dishes in the corner of the cafeteria. Then, Dake discovered that Senior was also a carnivore. Her taste was on the sweet side, and she liked salty and sweet flavors. If it's sweet and sour pork ribs, vinegar carp, and fish-flavored shredded pork, she should like it, right? This thought flashed through Dake's mind. In fact, that was also his favorite flavor, and he would more or less make some. However, it was a little undignified to use food as a Christmas gift. She wasn't a little foodie like Deanna. The table manners of this world actually didn't encourage talking while eating. However, as long as it wasn't a formal occasion, it wasn't that particular. The two ate while talking in a low voice. Panduola was very interested in Dake's timidity from time to time, so she asked him about his childhood. However, what interesting things did Dake have when he was a child in this world? He lowered his head slightly, looking a little embarrassed. Panduola became more and more interested. Dake really didn't want to talk about his past life's experience in this world, so he tried to change the topic. You can't keep asking me, right? Senior, what about you? Panduola smiled mysteriously. Have you heard of Dancing with Wolves? Of course, Dark had heard of it before, so he nodded honestly. Panduola then talked about her childhood experience. Under the moonlight, she stepped on the wolf's head and danced with the wolf. After Dake heard this, he couldn't help but open his mouth with a look of astonishment. Panduola covered her mouth and smiled like a lady. Panduola's appetite was bigger than Dake's. However, the nutrients flowed to where they should go. Dake felt that she and Deanna should have something in common. Although this dinner wasn't as lively as Wednesday night, as long as both parties were happy, it was the best dinner. Panduola wiped the grease at the corner of her mouth with a napkin and whispered, "Don't forget our agreement." Dake nodded slightly and couldn't help but ask, "So we'll meet at the ball next?" Panduola replied, "Yes. I have to prepare for a trip in these 2 days." Dake, "Where are you going?" Panduola smiled mysteriously. "I'll tell you when I come back." Dake was 12 years old and 1.59 meters tall. Panduola was 15 years old and 1.68 meters tall. The two were 3 years apart in age and 9 centimeters in height. Dake had just started to develop and felt that it wouldn't be a problem to catch up. Although Pandora was considered tall among the girls, she was still in the puberty stage. Therefore, it was still unknown who would win and who would lose. They walked side by side and chatted about daily topics before parting at a fork in the road. They were both smiling. But not long after, Dake couldn't smile anymore. He realized that he still hadn't thought of a Christmas present. Instead, he was looking forward to what Senior Sister would give him. He shook his head. Dake pushed open the tower door of the aristocrat house. A gust of warm air immediately hit him in the face. After he entered, he quickly closed the door. He saw that the common lounge was full of people. On the first night of the long vacation, there were so many students in the 6 grades of the aristocrat house. Except for a few who chose to go home, they were either in Traveler Street or in the common lounge. And there was a clear line between men and women. With the fireplace as the dividing line, the men's territory was near the door, and the women's territory was on the other side. Both sides defended their positions and eyed each other covetously. As soon as Dake entered, he saw a senior holding a letter and trying to break through the girls' formation. In the end, he fled back dejectedly amidst the laughter of the crowd. Not long after, a girl mustered up her courage and walked towards the boys' camp. She was welcomed by the boys. The difference in treatment between men and women was so obvious that it made people cry. However, the senior boy who received the girl's invitation politely rejected it. The girl grabbed the invitation and ran back while covering the corners of her eyes. "What's going on?" Dake looked at it for a while and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He scanned his surroundings and found the first years, Doran and the others, trembling in the corner. It was obvious that, like him, it was their first time experiencing such a situation. There was actually such a custom before the Christmas ball in Shangmalian. Dake frowned slightly. Suddenly, He noticed that Deanna and Luoc were winking at him from the girls' camp. They even stuck out their tongues playfully. From the looks of it, they were the chicks that were being protected. And the senior girls were the female birds that protected their young. If one wanted to invite the junior girls to the ball, they had to first go through their scrutiny. This was 2F** King. Interesting. 2 in 1. 4,000 words. Chapter 191. Dake glanced at the stairs between the male and female positions. He felt that going upstairs at this time would ruin the atmosphere. So, he greeted Deanna and Luoc and turned to the corner where the male students were, where Doran and the others were. The ratio of male to female first-year students was close to 1:1, so there were only a dozen or so first-year boys in the corner. There were probably still a few of them in the cold wind on Traveller Street. "Hey Dake, you're finally back." As soon as he saw Dake, Doran hurriedly waved his hand. Dake smiled and squeezed into the crowd. A student moved his bag aside to make room for him. "When did it start?" Dake whispered. Doran was like a spy who had infiltrated the enemy's camp. He said sneakily, "It was like this when we came back from dinner. At that time, the atmosphere was more anxious than it is now. It was like a war. We didn't dare to say anything." Dake: "Then what are they doing?" Doran: "I think it's called Operation Protect the Chicks. It's organized to prevent the junior students from getting carried away by the romantic atmosphere of Christmas." Dake: "Isn't that a good starting point?" Doran: "I heard that it was like this at the beginning. But something happened later that changed the atmosphere of the operation." Dake: "What happened?" Doran: "Isn't it embarrassing to have no dance partner at the Christmas ball? So, a senior student didn't want to lose face. He specifically went to find a junior girl who had some feelings for him. In the end, as soon as the ball ended, he dumped her. The girl couldn't take it anymore and almost jumped off the castle. It caused a big sensation." Dake was surprised. There was such a thing. Doran looked around and whispered, "It's true, but it's a little different from the rumors." Dake: "What do you mean?" Doran: "Actually, the female lead of that incident is a cousin of mine. She just graduated a few years ago. With her tyrannical temperament, how could she jump off a building? It's already good enough that she didn't throw that senior off the building." Dake had a strange expression. "So, it was actually that senior who jumped off the building." Doran: "It's like this. In short, this matter has developed to this point. It's no longer clear who is the perpetrator and who is the victim. Operation Protect the Chicks has also gradually changed. No matter which boy it is, he will be kicked out. Ugh, I wanted to find a girl to cooperate with, but now there's nothing I can do." Dake blinked and said, "Look on the bright side. Aren't the others unable to find a dance partner as well?" Doran the other hand. Doran immediately clapped his hands, said, "If no one has it, then it won't be embarrassing." Wonderful. Just as they were talking, a girl in the female camp stood up under the encouragement of a senior. The girl had a rare pink hairstyle, and her skin was fair and rosy, as if it was moist. On her slightly round face, her facial features were especially delicate, and her eyelashes were especially long. She had a timid look, as if she would cry if she was poked. "Isn't that Eudora?" Doran was astonished. Eudoron was the youngest girl among the first-year students of the Noble Academy. She had actually just turned 11 years old and was sent to the Shangmalian Academy in advance because of the phenomenon of magic power losing control. Doran's good friend, the little fatty Pitten, whispered, "I didn't expect Eudoron to be so bold. She dared to act with so many people watching her. If it were me, I would definitely wait until tomorrow morning to secretly." Doran: "No, I want to know who she has taken a fancy to." Dake teased, "Maybe it's you? Look, she's looking this way." Hearing what he said, Doran suddenly became nervous. His ears turned red at a speed visible to the eye, and he quickly shook his head. "No way, I haven't even spoken to her." The little fatty Pitten patted him on the shoulder and said with relief, Brother, everyone gets lucky sometimes. Euderon is a good girl. This. Doran suddenly realized that Euderon seemed to be really walking this way. He was suddenly a little stunned. Although he usually didn't pay much attention to her, now that he took a closer look, Euderon was really cute. If she's really here for me, should I say yes? But does she really like me? Seeing Doran become like a young girl, Dake couldn't help but smile. The pure love between junior boys and girls made people want to give their blessings. But the gap between the two sides was really big. The girls' camp didn't allow boys to get close, but they encouraged their girls to bravely express themselves. The boys' camp, on the other hand, could only accept it passively. They were completely in a state of disunity. A few senior students who seemed to be very popular also looked as if they were watching a show. In short, Euderon walked into the pack of wolves with a shy face, and then she really walked over to this corner. She even stopped in front of this table. She lowered her head and clutched an invitation letter hard, her toes trembling slightly. The scene suddenly quieted down. Doran was so excited that he almost couldn't keep up the serious expression on his face. So when a man chased a woman, it was as easy as a layer of gauze for a woman to chase a man. Doran clearly didn't care much about Euderon, but as long as Euderon took the initiative, he wouldn't be able to hold on. Many of the first year's boys revealed envious expressions. There were even some who gritted their teeth, wishing they could tear him apart. Doran, on the other hand, wished he could immediately snatch the invitation letter from Euderon's hands. Hello, I'm Euderon. Euderon suddenly spoke up. She said softly as if she was introducing herself. She still lowered her head and didn't dare to raise it. Her moist face was red. Hi. Doran was a little at a loss and wanted to respond. Euderon suddenly raised her hand and handed over the pink invitation letter with a heart and a Christmas tree pasted on it. My name is Dew. Doran's voice suddenly froze. Like a rusty robot. He turned his neck wheel that had been in disrepair for many years. His gaze followed the extension of Euderon's arm. Dake, Pa. In the girls' camp, a pitiful glass fell to the ground. Luosi was shocked and hurriedly took out a towel to help clean up the water stains on the ground. Although the glass was broken, there weren't many pieces. It was just that it scared people. Deanna squatted down in a hurry. For a moment, she wasn't in the mood to watch over there. Luosi couldn't help but grumble. You're too careless. Deanna pouted. Luosi continued. Didn't you help send a lot of replies on Halloween? Deanna. That's true. She suddenly became active. Dake and Euderon had never said a word. How could he agree? The princess wasn't causing trouble for the ball this time. Teddy. Chapter 192. Dake looked at the envelope in Eudora's hand awkwardly. It wasn't that he hadn't rejected anyone before. However, it was quite hurtful to reject a little girl in public. The seniors seemed to think that they could support the juniors by putting on such a formation, but in reality, once they were rejected, it would only be even more awkward. Just like the girl who was welcomed in by the boys and ran out crying. Wasn't this a public execution? Dake actually didn't like this kind of behavior. Private matters shouldn't be put on the table. Of course, if it was just watching, he could still watch with relish. However, this involved himself, so it felt different. People always had double standards. However, he still had to reject what he should. Website. https://vipcanchu. There was no other way. I'm sorry. However, just as Dake said that, Eudora suddenly stuffed the envelope in her hand into his hand. Then she said forcefully, You don't have to apologize. As long as you can take a good look at my letter, it's fine. After saying that, she raised her head. Her eyes revealed a determination that was different from her soft appearance. Dake was slightly stunned and didn't open it on the spot. Eudora didn't rush him either. He said helplessly, I'll take a look. Eudora suddenly bowed and said, Thank you. Then, the little girl with the pink doll head lowered her head again and turned to escape. Dake held the envelope in his hand and frowned slightly. This invitation, that was slightly different from what he had expected, attracted a lot of attention. However, because Dake had clearly rejected it, it didn't cause any topic in the end. Dake sat down again. Dolan, who was beside him, quickly regained his composure as if nothing had happened just now. He hid the awkwardness deep in his heart. Little fatty Pit-Tan didn't have so many scruples. He poked his head out from behind Dolan and asked softly, "Dake, could this be a confession letter?" Dake put the envelope into his bag and frowned. Maybe. Whether it was an invitation letter or a confession letter, it didn't matter, because the result was the same. "Look." Luosi nudged Deanna's arm and pouted. Deanna smiled. As expected, she rejected him, right? This action, which seemed interesting at first glance, but when you put yourself in his shoes, you would feel rather speechless, was still going on. Eudora was the first to deliver a letter to Dake, but she was by no means the last. Doran sat in the center seat, but he could only stare blankly as he watched Dake receive more and more dance invitations. It was as if all the first-year girls had discussed it and came up one after another to challenge the difficult missions. In the end, even the girl who came to deliver the letter was no longer nervous. Instead, she smiled and stuffed the letter into Dake's hands. Dake maintained the smile on his face, but his heart was gradually becoming numb. From the serious treatment of Eudora at the beginning to the swift rejection now, it had really gone through a process. Other than him, all the other first-year boys were lying on the ground like they were dead. Dolong asked weakly, "Hey Dake, how many times has it been?" Dake: 16. Doran: "How many are left?" Dake: 2. Doran: "There are a total of 18 first-year girls in the aristocratic academy. There are only 2 left, right?" Deanna displayed her smug mental arithmetic and snickered. Luosi also smiled. Among this batch of aristocratic academy students, Dake Dimming stood out. As long as one's gaze accidentally shifted to him, it would be difficult to look away. He was like a black hole absorbing all the light. Compared to him, the rest of the boys paled in comparison. For example, a boy like Doran, who was originally considered outstanding, couldn't receive any attention. This could only be said to be the sorrow of the times, the loss of morality, and the distortion of human nature. In a few years, when the girls' minds were more complete, they would probably look away from that dazzling halo. Luosi glanced at the students beside her. At first, they still had some sense of competition, but now that everyone was rejected, they laughed and played with each other. After all, they had common hobbies and had topics to talk about. The feeling was not so much falling in love with the same person, but rather pursuing the same idol. What made Luosi a little worried was that Eudora, who was the first to confess, she seemed to be different. At about 9 o'clock, this farce gradually dissipated. There were successes and failures. There were happy and sad. Dake carried 16 letters and returned to the dormitory with heavy steps. Behind him were the first-year boys' piercing gazes. It wasn't so exaggerated on Halloween. He rubbed his forehead and felt very tired. Fortunately, as soon as he opened the door, he saw the cute kitty grass at the door to greet him. He picked up the kitty grass and saw the milkmaid grass dozing at the door of the balcony. The kitty grass was still lying on the windowsill and squinting at the world. The kitty grass was still the best. Blurp. Dake rubbed his face hard against the kitty grass's cheek. He finally relaxed after sucking the kitty grass's nutrients. Then he summoned Kettle, squeezed a cup of apple juice, and finally began to read the 16 letters. First was Eudora's letter. He opened the pink envelope decorated with hearts and Christmas trees and took out the letter paper that emitted a faint fragrance. He slowly unfolded the folded letter paper. He first scanned it from top to bottom and then read it carefully. "I know that you have never paid attention to me. Even though we are always in the same classroom, the distance between you and me is like walking from the beginning to the end of a muddy river. I don't expect to receive a response after one confession. After all, there is a big difference between us. I'm not good enough for you now, but I'll work hard to make myself more outstanding. You are like the eternal sun in my heart. Even in this winter, the cold can't dispel the warmth you emit. One day, I will also become the warmth in your heart and use the heat of my body to feed your light. I'm yours, Dake. After reading the letter from beginning to end, Dake tried hard to recall the external impression Eudora gave people, but only a pink doll head appeared in his mind. So this is this child's personality. On the surface, this letter seemed to be quite progressive, but the dangerous aura between the lines was almost overflowing. It's too difficult for me. He had no choice but to put Eudora's letter in the upper left corner for the time being. Then, he picked up the next letter and continued to read. This second letter was finally a normal invitation to the ball, which made him slightly relieved. Out of courtesy, he would write a reply. Chapter 193. With the experience of Halloween, Dake was familiar with this kind of reply. He took out the spare letter and gave the other party a formal response, telling her that he was honored to receive her invitation, but he had an appointment in front of him, so he could only regretfully give up. Then, there was the third letter, the fourth letter. There were also one or two confession letters from girls, but they were all very normal. Dake told them to focus on their studies. The ignorance of youth might make you misunderstand some emotions that you have never felt before. That might not be love. True love should be precious, and something that could be relied on for a lifetime. It shouldn't be easily entrusted to others for the sake of so-called romance and yearning. Otherwise, it wouldn't be strange for one to be heartbroken when looking back at the end of one's life. You can't just fall in love with someone on the surface. Remember the website, VIP can't you? 6. It was almost 10 o'clock when Dake finished writing 15 replies. He waved at the little fiend beast and asked it to send the replies to the students one by one according to the names on the envelopes. The little fiend beast muttered as it flew out, bringing back a trace of cold wind when it went out. Dake took Eudora's confession letter again, thinking about how to get this child back on the right track. Regardless of whether it was a man or a woman, when they were young, their minds were immature, and they were easily influenced by others. It was difficult to escape the attraction brought by the charm of one's appearance. When one grew older, it was easy to distinguish whether one liked the appearance of a person or the person. Just like before Dake had a deep contact with Senior Panduola. He only liked her appearance, not her person. He wasn't the kind of person who would talk about things like love, when he didn't have any social interaction with her. Therefore, he didn't quite understand why Eudora could produce the kind of passionate emotions expressed in words. It can't be that you've been reading too much of those innocent young girls' literature, right? Dake poked his cheek with the pen. At this time, he should be seriously studying the problems left behind by fusion. Why don't we not reply? Although cold treatment isn't brilliant, it's better than the opposite effect. Maybe when she calms down, she can figure it out herself. Knock, knock, knock. Is the little fiend beast back? Dake turned to look at the door and got up to open it. He really did see a little demonic beast. However, Deanna and Luosi came with him. Both of them were wearing furry pajamas. One was a bear and the other was a bunny. Both of them exuded the fragrance of shower gel. Can I go in? As Deanna said this, her little head was already peeking under Dake's armpit. Good evening. Luosi raised his hand shyly and shook it. Dake let Deanna in and said helplessly, "Come in." After Little Bear, Little Rabbit, and Little Devil had all gone in, he closed the door again. Hee. Ever since the first time they came here, Deanna and Luosi had been going to Dake's room more and more frequently. They were no longer as reserved as before. As soon as Deanna entered the room, she saw the Christmas presents piled up in the corner of the room. She couldn't help but want to try them. However, her attention was quickly drawn to the letters on the table. Dake pulled out 2 chairs for them to sit down. He poured 2 glasses of juice and asked, "Why are you here so late?" Luosi held up the silver glass filled with pear juice as if it was a treasure. He smiled and said, "If I don't come, someone won't be able to sleep." Deanna's face turned red, and her eyes started to wander. Dake nodded slightly to show that he understood. "Go ahead," Deanna mumbled. "I just want to ask if there are any plans for the Christmas ball." Dake: "Yes, there are." Deanna: Dake said helplessly. "I already have a dance partner. Senior Panduola from the library." Deanna was stunned. She said subconsciously, "Dake, so you like dancing?" Dake couldn't help but smile. "She gave me a lot of advice on my research. Besides, it's just a ball." Deanna wasn't happy. "Why is it always like this?" Luosi was also very surprised. She originally thought that Deanna was in the bag. After all, Dake didn't show any intention of being too intimate with any of the girls. The two of them were undoubtedly the closest to Dake. If Dake wanted a dance partner, he should have chosen between the two of them. However, she didn't expect that a senior would suddenly appear out of nowhere. However, when she thought about it carefully, Senior Panduola was indeed very charming. She probably had a lot of admirers in the school. Dake actually made an agreement with Senior Panduola without any signs. She really didn't expect this. Luosi couldn't help but think of a sentence in a book. Outstanding people are always easily attracted to each other. Deanna was still not outstanding enough. She sighed slightly. She just didn't know how to comfort the childish Deanna next. Thinking of this, she couldn't help but look at Dake with a pleading look. However, Dake just shook his head slightly. He said to Deanna, "This Christmas ball is divided into the first half from 9 to 10, and the second half from 11 to 12. If you are willing, can you be my dance partner in the second half?" Deanna almost immediately came to life. She suddenly opened her eyes wide and looked at Dake. She raised her head and said, "Really?" Dake couldn't help but scratch the bridge of her nose. "Of course it's true." Deanna wanted to cheer, but she quickly covered her mouth and laughed. Lady. After leaving Dake's dormitory, Deanna walked as if she was floating. She whispered, "Luosi, do you think the first half or the second half is better?" Luosi thought for a while and said, "The first half is good. However, in the second half you can spend the last moment of Christmas Eve with your dance partner at the stroke of 12 o'clock. Deanna said, "Then the second half is better." Luosi said, "Okay, go to bed early. You have to keep a good complexion." Deanna said, "Okay." After Dark sent the two of them off, he let out a sigh of relief. The first half of the Christmas ball was actually the home court. Although the second half was more meaningful, people's energy was limited and their interest would gradually fade. Whether it was the first half or the second half, it was impossible to dance forever. It was normal to accept other people's invitations in the middle of the dance. In the second half, most people might not be in the banquet hall anymore. That meant that when it was almost 12 o'clock, they might come back to dance with him. Deanna was so easy to coax. He was so lucky. Even Chen Yushan knew that she would be there. Well, it should be fine, right? It was just a dance. Dake didn't take the Christmas ball too seriously. On the other side in the teaching room, as the clock pointed to 10 o'clock, White and Luo Boat's confinement punishment was finally over. After wishing the instructor a Merry Christmas, they took their school bags and ran back to the Night Academy's tower. "It's finally over, Luo Boat. Yes, we have 9 days of vacation. We are finally free." Under the moonlight, White and Luo Boat's eyes were filled with tears. But when they pushed open the door of the tower, they were stunned by the Christmas atmosphere that greeted them. The common room of the Night Academy was no different from that of the Aristocrat Academy, except for some differences in decorations. On the first night of the holiday, the Night Academy held a small celebration that didn't start until 10 o'clock. Many people even threatened to stay up all night. The atmosphere of the Night Academy was more unrestrained than that of the Aristocrat Academy. In the corner of the common room, senior couples could be seen everywhere. The people gathered in the middle were even having a magic chess game. White and Luo Boat were both very interested in magic chess. But it wasn't until now that the two suddenly realized that Christmas was really coming. "Hey Luo Boat, what do you want as a present?" White asked. Luo Boat shrugged. "How about a turkey leg? And I'll give you a turkey wing in return." White: "Okay, I'll think about it." The two closed the door to stop the wind from blowing in. And they deliberately didn't mention the Christmas ball on Christmas Eve. Luo Boat: "The Christmas ball is different from the Halloween ball. It seems that it's hard for juniors to find a dance partner." "Hey, didn't you say you wouldn't mention it?" White hurriedly changed the topic. "Luo Boat, how about a game? I can't even remember the last time we played magic chess." Luo Boat gradually became excited. "How can one game be enough? Let's fight until dawn." No matter what happened, everyone had their own way of living. White actually cared more about the Christmas ball than Luo Boat, but he was in a strange state of inferiority and didn't dare mention it at all. When he thought about the ball, he could only comfort himself that there would be plenty of time in the future, and there would be a chance next year. But this Christmas gift still had to be given. If he could use this opportunity to leave a good impression in front of his senior from Panduola, it would definitely be worth it. But how should he choose this gift? "Forget it, let's play a game of magic chess first." The next morning. Perhaps it was the holiday effect, but Dake rarely slept late. He picked up the cat grass that was licking his face and put it back in the sleeping basket. He yawned slightly and got out of bed. The winter sun shone through the gaps in the curtains and reflected mottled shadows on the floor. Dake opened the curtains and looked outside for a while. He didn't know what he was looking at, but he stood there in a daze for 2 minutes. Then, as if he suddenly woke up, he turned around and went to the bathroom. He washed his face, combed his face, and tidied his hair. A holiday should be a holiday. Dake didn't plan on solving all the problems from last semester during the holiday. He picked up a book called Claire's Weekly Travels, and sat on the deck chair on the balcony to read it. When the little devil placed bread, bacon, sausages, eggs, and milk on the stool next to him, he began to read and eat. "This kind of life suits me." It wasn't until after breakfast that Dark put down a section of Claire's Weekly Travels, and picked up today's Great Sage Daily. It was only 2 days before Christmas. After the Holy Church announced that they would hold a large mass with the Holy Church's School of Mystics, the princess also announced that on Christmas Eve, she would personally pray for the people at the Hero Square in the royal capital. At that time, there would be a large number of small gifts given for free in the Hero Square. Faith or free gifts, which one is more attractive? Dake read this and couldn't help but laugh. Although the conflict between the Hawk faction and the Dove faction had gradually surfaced, the two factions had their own concerns and had stopped at such small skirmishes for the time being. If you put yourself in the perspective of a bystander, sometimes it would be quite interesting. Afternoon. Dake went to Traveller Street again. From that day onwards, there were suddenly many pairs of people on the street. The Christmas decorations were all over the place, and there were Christmas trees with colorful lights everywhere. Cute magic elves were flying in the air, holding signs to attract customers. Dake occasionally caught a glimpse of White and Luo Boat in the crowd. Thinking that they had finally escaped from the hell of confinement, he couldn't help but feel happy for them. The Christmas ball was different from a masquerade ball. If you wanted to appear at the ball, a formal outfit was necessary. Therefore, all the clothing stores in the clothing district were overcrowded. Students might not be able to find a regular dance partner before the ball, but they still had a chance after the ball began. For a long time, there were many men and women who successfully held hands in the atmosphere of the ball. The prerequisite was to have a formal outfit. Dake looked at the crowded crowd and couldn't even find a gap. He couldn't help but feel lucky that he had bought the Night Prince costume before Halloween. Bonus point for Deanna. Then he went to the small garden in the middle of the street and watched a magic circus for a while. The clowns in the circus controlled all kinds of magic elves to carry out an extremely clever performance. The superb control skills made the magic elves' movements without any delay, as if they were completely real life. Dake watched and couldn't help but intertwine his fingers together. He finally had an inspiration. I'll give that. After deciding on the Christmas gift for Panduola, Dake didn't stay in Traveller Street anymore. He began to buy some necessary items for the adventure according to his plan. He wasn't completely without plans for the 9 days of vacation. Christmas was only secondary. It was a rare vacation, and he wanted to use this opportunity to explore the secret passage for a longer period of time. It was also time to find the treasure that the Valkyrie left in the secret passage. Although he didn't have a strong desire for the treasure, he was quite curious about the treasure itself. He had asked Claire about this before, but Claire only smiled mysteriously and told him that the reason why treasures were treasures was because they were full of surprises. Wouldn't it be less fun if he knew what was hidden inside from the beginning? Dake said that he didn't care. Claire didn't talk to him anymore. After returning to the dorm, Dake completely calmed down. He spent about 3 hours on the problems left by fusion. After that, he relaxed and began to read some books. In the blink of an eye, the moon fell, and the Shangmalian welcomed the last night before the Christmas ball. Some people were looking forward to it. Some people couldn't sleep. Some people secretly made up their minds. The bats that were active all over the castle seemed to have suddenly received some kind of call. They quietly flew into the upper level of the castle and disappeared into the entrance of the secret passage. Everything was brewing. 2-in-1 4,100 words. Chapter 194. Sunday, December 24th. Sunday was the most special day of the week. It was both the Sabbath and Sunday. Worshippers usually attend church services on this day. Since it was Christmas Eve, thousands of families went to the church to pray for everyone's safety. Even though the kingdom's holy church supported the Eagle faction, this did not stop the believers from yearning for peace. After experiencing the baptism of blood in the demon race's war, the current peace seemed rare and precious. The wisdom of the people grew rapidly in the war, and they could see the so-called gods and beliefs relatively clearly. They would not be blinded. Most of the low-level believers went to the church for a peace of mind, not to believe in some god they had never seen before. After all, when they were in danger, the one who saved them from the abyss of suffering was not some god. Instead, they were heroes who rushed to the front lines and fearlessly sacrificed themselves. Remember in 1 second https:// Vipkanshu. VIP. The Shangmalian Academy was the most famous production base for heroes, and the reverence it received had actually surpassed that of the saint. It was just that the Shangmalian Academy was not open to the public, and there were no churches set up in the various towns, so there was no place for people to worship. It couldn't be helped. This was life. Since he couldn't get close to the best, he could only comfort himself with the second one. After all, there were a few heroes in the Saint Church, right? The Saintess of the Battlefield, who had inherited the title of Joan of Arc, was one of the more famous ones. Amidst the fragmented prayers, the kingdom ushered in a new day. It was the same for the Shangmalian. After finishing her daily prayers, Sister Kalyen picked up a coat and draped it over her shoulders. The backlog of work over the past few days was finally completed yesterday. From today onwards, she would also have a holiday, if she was lucky enough. Unfortunately, according to the usual pattern, there would be a few loopholes every Christmas. So much so that she didn't dare to drink to her heart's content at the ball. However, she had come prepared for this year's Christmas ball. She had specially prepared a hangover recipe. As long as a dose of sobering medicine was administered, no matter how drunk one was, they would instantly sober up. Even if the price was double the drunkenness afterwards. She yawned and prepared to take advantage of her free time to go to Traveller Street and buy a few small gifts. She usually hid in the infirmary and didn't socialize much, but now she couldn't hide anymore. Teachers often exchange gifts with each other, especially the few professors who stayed in the academy. They were Professor Li Li, Professor Ka Zaire, and Professor Shi Erfu. They were all homeless people, so they had to huddle together to keep warm. Otherwise, how could they survive the cold winter? Speaking of those professors, Lily was drunk again last night. He was lying on the sofa like a dead pig. He probably wouldn't be able to get up until the afternoon. Professor Kazair and Professor Shi Erfu were busy preparing for the Christmas ball. Professor Shi Erfu was in charge of the specific arrangements for the ball, while Professor Kazair was using the Holy Grail to make a one-time use Christmas stocking. Come to think of it, Professor Kazair was really pitiful. He was responsible for more than 80% of the ghosts on Halloween. The 1,000 socks for Christmas were all made by him, however, in Shangmalian. He only received the salary of an ordinary professor. Tragic. In the early morning, frost had already appeared on the buildings, and thin pieces of ice had also appeared on the lake. As the temperature of the sun gradually rose, the frost melted, and the Shangmalian Academy gradually regained its vitality. The students began to walk out of the tower one after another. All of his previous savings and preparations would be decided tonight. In the dormitory of the Aristocrat Academy, Dake was still reading Claire's Weekly Travels. This book was unexpectedly interesting. Although Aunt Claire was like that, her writing style was more humorous and relaxed. When she wrote the story, she drew pictures of every scenic spot. It could be said that she was very attentive. The process of reading this book was like following her footsteps and walking through thousands of mountains and rivers. It was hard to imagine that one could walk such a long journey alone. The relaxed and humorous writing couldn't hide the tiredness of the journey. Not to mention the dangers in the deep mountains and wild forests, and the ferocious bandits and thieves. Dake suddenly felt that he shouldn't have given her that bottle of Bohuang wine. Perhaps he should have bought her a whole set of cosmetics. Of course, Claire herself would definitely like that bottle of wine more. 48 hours passed in the blink of an eye. He didn't know if Claire was home yet. Perhaps tonight on Christmas Eve, she would light a candle on the dining table and taste a bottle of hot red wine filled with the smell of blood on the battlefield with Arvet. Another afternoon passed. Dake packed up and prepared to go to battle. From the bottom of his heart, he liked this kind of youthful holiday atmosphere. However, if he had too much contact with it, sometimes he would get into a lot of trouble in interpersonal relationships. The entrance to the Christmas ball was at 7 p.m. The location of the ball was still the same hall during the division ceremony. The students would occasionally call it the Great Hall or Banquet Hall. Different from Halloween because there were no masquerade activities, and most of the professors were no longer in school. The school was not strict about the time of the Christmas ball. If you wanted, you could even enter the Great Hall at 5 or 6 p.m. Tonight's ball didn't have a guest like the princess, but it was said that the magic circus that performed in Traveller Street was invited. Although the little magisters could also summon magic guiding fairies, the magic guiding fairies in the circus always gave people a refreshing feeling when they directed them to perform. At about 6:30 p.m., Dake had just changed into the Prince of Night costume when he heard a knock on the door. He pushed the black crow mask that was no longer useful to him to the corner of the table. Then he straightened his collar and went to open the door. "Good evening, ladies." The moment he opened the door, he gave the most standard gentleman's salute. Deanna at the door was slightly stunned. Then she happily reached out her hand. "Good evening, Dake." Dark took her hand and tapped it on the palm of his hand that was wearing a black lace glove, causing her to giggle. Luo Si suddenly showed a look of disappointment. Only then did Dark raise his head and look at the two women who were dressed to the nines. As expected, Deanna had changed into the Princess of Night costume. It was a black velvet princess dress that matched Dake's outfit very well. The skirt that was supported by the dress had a particularly fluffy feeling. The exaggerated decorations and cute frills of the dress were definitely not something that ordinary people could wear. Deanna's silver hair was neatly combed. At first glance, it was obvious that it was Luo Si's handwriting. The expensive hair accessories on the side of her head made her look more dignified and noble, and less childish. The thin crystal high heels slightly made up for her height that was slightly shorter than her peers. Deanna's personality was usually too outstanding, so people often forgot that her maternal bloodline came from the royal family. Although she was only a distant relative of the royal family, Her soft silver hair still revealed an untouchable nobility. The 12-year-old Deanna, after carefully dressing up, actually had the feeling of a beauty. Dake's eyes immediately turned to Luo Si. Different from the sergeant's outfit at the masquerade ball, Luo Si also changed into a dress that matched her temperament. She obviously preferred a clean and pure white color. Her body, which was taller than Deanna's, moved up and down with the help of the corset. Her waist became slender, and the skirt that was supported by the dress was like a blooming flower. The multi-layered design gave a strong visual impact. Luo Si, who chose flat red dancing shoes, was about the same height as Deanna when she stood up, so there was no contrast. It seemed that she had been careful not to cover up Deanna's brilliance, but her natural beauty was not something that could be covered up by these small details. She inherited the light blonde hair from her noble parents, which made her look like a real princess. Even if Anna and Enchi were here, they could not completely take away her brilliance. Different from the timid Shangmalian when she first came here, Luo Si was obviously more open. This was not only due to Deanna's influence, but also because there was a young boy in their small circle who gathered all the brilliance. Although it did not sound like a good thing at first, it was the truth. No matter where one was, the level of one's circle had a very important impact on one's mentality and the perception of the outside world. The small circle formed by the three of them was undoubtedly the best among the first-grade students in the aristocratic academy. Deanna, who was careless, did not notice it. Luo Si, who was attentive, could always see the color of envy in the eyes of her classmates, which made her feel better. Therefore, she always felt that she was lucky to have met Deanna and Dake. Her smile became brighter and brighter. Dake looked away, feeling slightly lucky. Fortunately, he was not the same as he was in the past. After going through the training of Senior Panduola and the cute attack of the catnip grass, his mind was now firm enough, and he would not casually trigger the prehistoric force. The time is just right. Dake locked the door and walked to the entrance of the corridor. Luo Si quickly pushed Deanna's arm, and Deanna reacted and quickly reached out to hold Dake's arm. But she was obviously not used to the thin high heels under her feet, and her body leaned over. Dake reacted quickly, and after taking a step back, he reached out and held her hand. It was small and it emitted heat. Deanna blushed and smiled shyly. Then she took Dake's arm and walked downstairs. Dake did not care, and only glanced at Luo Si. Luo Si winked at him, indicating that she could go alone. The three of them walked to the common lounge one after another. At this time it was an awkward time. Many people were still chatting and stalling for time in the common lounge when they happened to see the three of them. One would get used to seeing a golden boy and a jade girl after seeing too many of them. But tonight's meaning was a little different. The students of the Aristocrat Academy had left an impression on the 16 invitations the night before. When they saw Dake and Deanna walking together, they suddenly realized that the final winner was here. Especially the first-year girls who had been rejected on the spot. They looked at Deanna with envy. They muttered something like, "The pavilion closest to the water gets the moonlight first," and gestured to their chests. Then they all revealed dejected expressions. They were all of the same age, so why? Eudora was reading a book in the corner. Her grades could only be considered average. Although there seemed to be only a year difference between 11 and 12 years old, her mental growth was different day by day. She actually could not keep up with the progress. But fortunately she worked hard enough. "I'm still young." Glancing at Deanna's chest, Eudora expressed that she still had potential. As for the fact that she didn't receive a reply the night before, that was within her expectations. She didn't know that she was the only one who didn't receive a reply. After all, no one would publicize this kind of thing. Moreover, they had already been rejected once on the surface. Dake's reply seemed to be sincere and polite, but for the girls, it was also a second rejection. He didn't have any relevant experience in his previous life, so he was still negligent when it came to emotional matters. The moment when Dake's group pushed open the door became an opportunity. The students in the common lounge also stood up and walked out one after another. The light emitted from the door illuminated the bridge. Every student who walked through it could feel an additional sense of ritual. The Christmas ball had already begun in their hearts from here on. It would take about 5 minutes to walk from the tower of the Aristocrat Academy to the auditorium on the first floor if they walked slowly. Dake was very worried that Deanna would accidentally fall, so he kept holding her hand. Outside the main entrance of the auditorium stood 2 glowing elks. They were both wearing cute Christmas hats on their heads. Dake followed the behavior of the senior in front of him and took off the Christmas hat of an elk. Sure enough, another Christmas hat spun down from the top of its head and landed steadily on the elk's head. This seemingly simple scene actually contained an extremely powerful technique. Dake sighed in his heart and put the Christmas hat on Deanna's head. Then he took off another one for himself and put it on. 2 first-year students wearing Christmas hats pushed open the door and entered. In an instant, the setting of the entire auditorium came into view. The 4 iconic long tables in the auditorium were still there. The long tables were covered with red tablecloths embroidered with Christmas trees, elks and sleighs. Silver candlesticks floated above the long tables, but the candles were not lit yet. On the stage in front of them there was a huge Christmas tree. Big and small gift boxes hung on the Christmas tree, as well as countless decorations. The most eye-catching decorations were a crown, a grimoire, a lance, and the Fool tarot card. These were the symbols of the 4 academies. They were the spirit of the academies. Glowing fairies danced around the Christmas tree and let out bell-like laughter. The atmosphere of the Christmas ball was overflowing. 2 in 1, 4,000 words. Chapter 195. According to the arrangement of grades, the senior students sat near the stage, while the first years could only sit at the back. There was a hierarchy between the top and the bottom. This was not just a microcosm of this era. Dake entered the auditorium and found a seat at the long table belonging to the aristocrats. He happily waited for the Christmas ball to begin. During the Halloween ball, he only joined in halfway, so he did not experience this kind of eagerness. In short, it felt good. Dake picked up the teapot on the table, poured the black tea into the teacups, and handed them to Deanna and Luosi one by one. Beside the tea set, there was a freshly baked chocolate chip cookie. Together with the black tea, the aroma was overwhelming. At around 6:50 p.m., suddenly, a large group of people rushed in from the main entrance, and the auditorium instantly became lively. The piano in the corner of the stage automatically played a melodious tune. The professors who stayed in the school also came out from behind the stage and sat in the teachers' seats one after another. The website was https://vipcanshu. It was obvious that the professors had also dressed up carefully tonight. Professor Ka Zaire was wearing a suit, tie, and leather shoes, like a graceful old gentleman. Professor Shi Erfu was wearing a light green dress, and a furry scarf was wrapped around her slender neck. Her hair was tied up high, and there was a golden phoenix hairpin entwined with wind elements. Professor Li Li was wearing a nightgown and yawning, looking as if she had not woken up yet. It was not until Sister Kalyen patted her awake that she reluctantly used a disguise card and transformed into a cute and charming little fairy. In addition, there was Bella from the library. Gloria from the teaching room. However, there was no sign of the principal. However, the senior students were already used to it. Principal Aertiai's way of thinking was really unimaginably old-fashioned, such as the persistence of appearing last. During the celebration, she was always the last to appear, like the stars that decorated the celebration more and more brightly. By the time he came back to his senses, the 4 long tables were already filled with people. Dake saw White and Luo boat in front of the Night Academy's table next door. Next to them was Ai Ma. Ai Ma wasn't dressed as formally as Deanna and Luo Si, but it was obvious that she had dressed up meticulously. However, the makeup that she didn't know if it was done by herself only made her look more youthful. She was already younger than her peers to begin with, and now it was even more obvious. His youthful appearance coupled with his stubborn eyes gave him a unique temperament. Dake had a nagging feeling that she was being treated as a Barbie doll by a senior to practice her makeup. She didn't seem to like this makeup, so she kept frowning. A little later, Panduola finally appeared at the entrance. In a ball where everyone was dressed in formal attire, her white muslin dress didn't stand out. However, the exposed collar of her delicate collarbone and her protruding breasts caught people's eyes. She had a smile on her face, and pearl earrings were hanging on her delicate earlobes. Her actions didn't lose their elegance and elegance. What a beautiful person. Will Diana be this beautiful in the future? Diana lowered her head and looked at her chest. She felt stable. Luoxi's expression changed slightly. People's physiques couldn't be compared to each other. Perhaps it was because of the difference in their grades. Diana didn't seem to see Panduola as a competitor. Perhaps even she herself didn't understand why she had such a good impression of Dark. Perhaps she just wanted to be with him, whether it was eating or dancing. Senior Pandora, who came in through the door, swept a glance in the direction of the noble dean's table and quickly discovered Dark among them. She raised her arm and waved at Dark. She grinned, then turned around and walked towards the long table in the Mage Institute. As her back was gradually blocked by other people, Dake withdrew his gaze. Then he happened to see Victor, who was staring back at him for some reason. White. Luo Boat suddenly poked White's waist. White came back to his senses and hurriedly turned his head, but his heart was already in turmoil. Just now, Senior Sister was waving at Dake, right? He asked in a low voice. Ah. Which Senior Sister? Did Panduola pass by? Luo Boat didn't notice Panduola at all. White stared blankly for a moment, feeling a little unhappy. Dake didn't understand, but Diana beside him whispered, "Dake, do you like bears?" This question didn't have any foreshadowing. Even if Dake wanted to connect the dots, he didn't know where to start. He didn't answer for a long time until Diana urged him. "Bears are so cute, of course I like them." Diana nodded in satisfaction, then whispered to Luoxi beside her. Dake shook his head, wondering if Diana was talking about a Christmas present. "She's not going to give me a stuffed bear, right? That can't be, right?" Dake's expression changed slightly. The more he thought about it, the more likely it was. That wouldn't be a good present. He'd rather get a toffee. 7 o'clock sharp. As the bell on the clock tower rang, the magic lights in the auditorium suddenly went out. The light disappeared, and darkness enveloped the auditorium. Only the Christmas tree on the stage still emitted a faint glow. The junior students were frightened. The senior students, on the other hand, were calm and collected. Sure enough, 3 seconds later, just as the screams started, the auditorium lit up again. The light source that lit up the auditorium changed from the magic lights to the candles on the silver candlesticks. Thousands of candles were floating in the air, illuminating the auditorium. On the long table covered with a Christmas tablecloth, neatly arranged gold and silver cutlery quietly appeared. The light from the candles shone on the gold plates and silver goblets, reflecting the colorful light. It was like a dream. The first-year students had never experienced such a sudden surprise. After a moment of silence, there was a rush of loud discussion. Shoo! Principal Arte, who was wearing a Christmas hat, successfully stepped onto the stage without anyone noticing when light and darkness alternated. She stretched out her hand, and a little fairy wrapped in white light flew into her palm. Then, it suddenly transformed into a reindeer with a long star-like tail. The brown-furred reindeer with huge antlers ran forward, and a sleigh piled with gift bags appeared from the starlight. It ran out from Principal Arte's palm and dragged the sleigh through the air. It ran from the stage all the way through the auditorium, broke through the door, and disappeared into the distance. The starlight scattered from the gift bags on the sleigh fell onto the plates, and turned into turkeys that emitted a strong meaty aroma. The soft belly of the turkey was cut open, and it was full of spices. The grease that slid down the drumstick formed a thin layer on the plates. Dake couldn't help but want to eat. It was rare to have a Christmas ball, so excessive moderation was not advisable. Gluttony only had 60 points, so there was still plenty left. Today is Christmas Eve. Principal Aerti's voice was full of seductive magnetism. It's a day to reunite with family. But to me, Shangmalian is my home. Every student here is my family, Wang Chong said. Every Christmas Eve, I will make a wish that I can spend the next Christmas Eve with my family. It seems that my wish from last year has come true again. Principal Aerti couldn't help but smile. As a principal, I have a lot to say, but I hope that the rest of the time will be reserved for the ball. I believe that all of you feel the same, right? The audience cheered. Principal Aerti opened his arms and embraced the air. Since that's the case, I'll stop here. I wish you all a peaceful Christmas Eve. No matter when or where, peace will be with you, my dear family. As soon as he finished speaking, the 4 long tables lit up with white light at the same time, and the empty plates around the turkeys were suddenly filled with exquisite delicacies. Roast meat, lamb chops, sausages, steaks, pudding, potatoes, apple pies, syrup pies, chocolate muffins, donuts. Of course, there were also the indispensable beans. Dake glanced at the whole pot of beans in front of him and couldn't help but recall the time when he first entered the school, and his heart was surging with emotions. Fate came and went, and fate was fate. The piano in the corner of the stage suddenly changed, and the music became cheerful, just like the hearts of the students. As Principal Aerti retreated behind the scenes, the banquet began as scheduled. First, of course, was the usual eating. Only after eating could they talk about other things. The sumptuous food was enough to make people drool. The turkeys were dissected by knives and forks, and the auditorium was filled with the rich aroma of chicken meat. But the most aromatic part was actually the seasoning in the belly of the turkey. Dake didn't think too much and ate as much as he wanted. Gluttony did increase, but it wasn't much. After eating half of the turkey, his eating speed slowed down, and the notification of gluttony +1 disappeared. While drinking juice to help with digestion, Dake looked at Deanna beside him. Occasionally, he would help her cut the meat into smaller pieces and pull the napkin properly to prevent the sauce from getting on her clothes. The atmosphere in the auditorium was getting more and more cheerful. At 7:30, a small magic elf suddenly appeared on the stage, flapping its wings. Then, a clown in a Christmas costume somersaulted into the auditorium, and it attracted a lot of cheers. The magic circus had begun. The entire half-hour magic show pushed the cheerful atmosphere to the extreme. Dake was immersed in such an atmosphere. Other than occasionally thinking about the clown's superb skills, he showed his love for the circus like the rest of the audience. It was really good. Apart from everything else, fun was indeed the soul of a circus. At 8 o'clock sharp, as the Christmas clown left the stage, the students who thought that the show would end there suddenly found a clear spring on the stage. The clear spring water gushed out from the middle of the stage, forming a mushroom shape that was wide at the top and narrow at the bottom. A mermaid wearing shells and pearls suddenly appeared from the bottom of the spring water. With a swing of her long tail, she jumped to the top of the spring water. She sat cross-legged on the spring water, and with a light hug, an elegant harp appeared in her hands. Then her sandalwood tan mouth opened slightly, and the lyrics of a song were sung long and drawn out. It's the mermaid, Miss Star Luo. The students below the stage suddenly became restless. While Dake was dumbfounded, the surrounding students seemed to have a clearer understanding of the mermaid. He couldn't help but look at Deanna. Deanna looked away. Don't look at me, Deanna doesn't know. Luosi couldn't help but cover her mouth and chuckle. That's the famous mermaid singer, Miss Star Luo. Her singing is as moving as a lark, and she is very popular in the kingdom. I didn't expect Principal Aerti to prepare such a surprise. Dark. In this era, is it possible for singers to step onto the stage? Luosi shook her head. The rise of musicals has changed a lot, but it's still limited. Miss Star Luo is a rare mermaid, so she is treated more respectfully than a human singer. In the end, the nobility of professions and the weight of men and women were all topics that had not changed for a long time. In this era that was approaching the Renaissance, the status of artists had greatly increased, and the rights of women were gradually being protected. The vile slavery system was suppressed by a large number of objections, and workers received wages equal to the labor force. But it was still in the early stages. The mermaid singer wasn't the last surprise. She only sang a song on the stage, and a group of swan people with snow-white wings suddenly flew from the sky, as if angels had descended to earth. The ballet they were rehearsing, Swan Lake, was immediately performed. Princess Ojetta, who was picking flowers by the lake, was cast a vicious spell by the ferocious devil Rothbart and turned into a beautiful swan. Only when night fell, the princess could temporarily change back to human form. Only unswerving love could break the evil spell. Prince Siegfried, who was wandering around Swan Lake, happened to meet the princess who was in human form. The beast blood hidden deep in his heart boiled, and he fell in love at first sight. When the prince returned to the castle, he held a ball to choose the future queen. The devil asked his daughter, the Black Swan, to disguise herself as Ojetta to deceive the prince. When the prince and the Black Swan were dancing, Ojetta appeared at the window. She begged the prince to remember his promise to her, but the prince was distracted by the devil's spell. Under the devil's request, the prince made a vow of love to the Black Swan. The devil's plot succeeded, and Ojetta cried out in despair and left. Suddenly, lightning flashed and thunder roared, and the ballroom was in chaos. The prince came to his senses in despair, but it was too late. He had made another vow of love to someone else. The deceived prince rushed out to find the real Ojetta. The last scene. When the prince returned to Swan Lake, he was heartbroken. The devil created a snowstorm to stop the prince from looking for Ojetta. But the prince finally broke through the snowstorm and found Ojetta. However, infinite love and endless regret could not change the result of breaking the promise. The spell could not be broken, and the prince and the princess were destined to be separated. The devil showed his ferocious face at this time, and turned the princess and her companions into swans floating on the lake. The grieving prince and the queen embraced each other and jumped into the raging waves of the lake with the belief that they would rather die than love. In an instant a miracle appeared. Justice defeated evil, and unswerving love defeated the evil devil. The magic was broken, the devil's den collapsed, the lake receded, and the swans were reborn. The prince and the princess bathed in the light of the rising sun, and their beautiful life began again. Although there were many tragic endings in Swan Lake, it was obvious that an unreasonable comedic ending had been chosen here. In the face of the so-called miracle, the powerful devil was defenseless. But no one cared about these loopholes in the logic. The swan's acting skills, thunder and lightning, the snowstorm, and the extremely shocking soundtrack created an incomparable sense of immersion. The audience had no extra time to think about the details. This song, Swan Lake, became the most praised program on Christmas Eve. As the prince and princess happily snuggled up to each other under the stage lights, the 9 o'clock clock quietly rang without anyone noticing. The opera ended. But the prince and the princess did not leave. Instead, they waltzed in the romantic and elegant music. Only then did the students come to their senses. The ball began. Deanna watched Dake stand up. Dake could only give her an apologetic look. Lucy hugged Deanna's arm. Under the confused gaze of the surrounding students, Dake walked to the middle seat of the Magic Engineering School. White, who was excitedly chatting with Luo Boat about justice will prevail over evil, suddenly noticed Dake walking in front of him. His expression suddenly stiffened. An ominous premonition floated in his heart. His keen perception as a hero made him realize that things might be developing in a direction that was not favorable to him. He was always able to foresee danger in advance. Luo Boat, who was next to him, also saw Dake's figure and asked curiously, "Why is Dake walking over there? Isn't his dance partner Deanna?" White stared at Dake's back and did not answer Luo Boat. Sitting in their seats, White was able to see a little of Panduola's back. This was originally something that made him happy, but now it had a bad effect. He tilted his head and saw Panduola standing up from her seat. Then she stretched out her slender white jade-like fingers to the blonde noble youth. Dake took her hand and lowered his head to kiss the back of her hand. The soft touch passed through the white lace and touched the bottom of their hearts. The surrounding fourth-year students of the Magic Engineering School were all shocked and frightened at the same time. Several male students who were eager to ask Pandora to dance with them saw the silver-ranked dragoness accept the first-year student's invitation. She revealed a rare, soul-stirring smile as she walked towards the wide stage to the beat of the music. Many people rubbed their eyes, as if they were dreaming. It was the fourth year. In the past 4 years, the Silver Dragon Princess, who was known as the Iron Wall of the Ball, had never been invited to dance with anyone. But now, she was so willing that she even took the initiative to walk side by side with someone and step onto the stage. Tonight was really a dream start. Dake held Panduola's hand and walked to the stage. Although he had expected this, he was still a little surprised by the stabbing pain on his back. Is this the so-called feeling of having a knife on my back? It's literally. But he didn't know that it wasn't just the boys who were stabbing him. There were also a few girls who were secretly encouraging themselves and preparing to take the initiative to ask him to dance when the ball started. Ai Ma put her hands on the table and used her palms to hold her round face. Through the gaps between people, she saw Deanna sitting across from her. The two girls looked at each other for some reason. Deanna had an idea and immediately raised her chest. She showed a "I'm different from you" attitude. Ai Ma glanced at her. After the last competition in class, she had some thoughts that she didn't quite understand. Then she asked the upperclassmen and was dressed up like a Barbie doll. But the effort she put in for this seemed to be hard to get rewarded. Behind her, in front of the dean's table, Sarah, who was flaunting her confidence, also died before she could win. Her hardcore supporter Heidi felt helpless. Her opponent was too strong. As the rhythm of the music changed, more and more couples or couples who had agreed to dance with each other stood up from their seats. With graceful steps, they walked out of the area formed by 4 long tables and walked towards the crimson-carpeted stage. The Swan Princess and the Human Prince's waltz was so beautiful. Dake and Panduola looked at each other and smiled. They also tiptoed on the stage. The romantic atmosphere of the Christmas ball gradually became more and more intense. Cute little elves shuttled through the crowd and became the best decorations for the ball. The number of people dancing on the stage gradually increased. Gorgeous fireworks bloomed in the sky above their heads one after another. Panduola blinked and approached Dake with dance steps. Dake was forced to step back by her snow-white gaze. The senior sister retracted her toes happily. Dake leaned forward and synchronized with the dance steps. The two spun in a circle and switched positions. The background in their field of vision changed. Dake suddenly noticed Professor Li drinking wine at the teacher's table. He wondered if he should give him the Christmas gift tonight or wait until tomorrow. And Professor Shi Erfu's bottle of wine. Ouch! Dake subconsciously retracted his feet from the sharp pain in his toes. He then noticed Chen Yushan's raised eyebrows. He quickly collected his thoughts and focused on the circle dance. Senior Pandora took advantage of the situation to lean forward and whisper in his ear, "You're right. Do you know how impolite it is to be distracted while dancing with a lady?" Nirvana +1. Dake's ears and eyes turned red. Panduola's eyes flashed with excitement. However, she suddenly felt a strong force on her arm and her whole body was pulled to the side. She then turned around and fell into Dake's arms in a half-lying position. Dake lowered his head and looked down at Chen Yushan's face. Her slightly powdered face was white with a hint of red. Her long eyelashes exuded a faint seduction. Her bright red lips could make people feel hungry. The small heart-shaped silver scales under the corner of her eyes reflected the stage lights. There was a hint of confusion. 3 in 1 6,000 words, 3 chapters at a time. Chapter 196. Their gazes intertwined for 12.6 seconds. As the atmosphere became more and more ambiguous, Panduola suddenly exerted her strength and turned around to suppress Dake. The positions of the two sides suddenly changed. Seeing Dake's eyes flash with a trace of surprise, Panduola couldn't help but tease him. In front of Panduola, who could step on a wolf's head and dance under the moon at a very young age, Dake, who skipped the Valkyrie's strength training, couldn't resist at all. Only now did Dake realize that he was just a little lamb exposed to the wolf's mouth. However, he blinked and took the opportunity to turn around and escape from the wolf's mouth. Sure enough, Panduola cooperated. Under his lead, she stepped forward and caught up. Then, with a tap of her toes, she turned 360 degrees and weakly fell down again. Dake reached out and grabbed her waist. The lower edge of her chest entered his field of vision, showing her expanding vitality. Remember the URL, VIP Kanshu. VIP. The music suddenly stopped. Panduola rolled along Dake's arm and suddenly stood up with her body pressed against his chest. The song ended. When Dake and Panduola walked off the stage side by side, the tableware on the 4 long tables had been cleared and replaced with brand new drinks and pastries. There was no longer a seating arrangement for the Christmas ball. Everyone could move around freely. Panduola seemed to be satisfied with the interaction of the song. She slightly lifted her skirt and walked out of the auditorium with Dake. The two tacitly didn't say anything. It wasn't until they went around a wall and couldn't see the lights of the ball anymore that they sat down on a stone bench. Panduola looked up at the Christmas night sky. Unexpectedly, a blush appeared on her cheeks. Although she acted like she had a lot of experience, tonight was actually her first time dancing with someone. Fortunately, she had secretly practiced the circle dance in the past. So one song was enough. What if she accidentally exposed herself after dancing a few more times? It wasn't easy for him to maintain his image. After a while she said, "Thank you. This is the best Christmas present I've ever received." Dake was slightly taken aback, as if he didn't expect this to be the first thing he said after coming out. But then he smiled and said, "This is not a Christmas present, Panduola. In my heart this is it." All right. Dake looked at the night sky helplessly. Perhaps all outstanding people had their own stubborn sides. It was unknown where the moon was hidden tonight. The sky was clear as if it had been washed clean. Only fragments of starlight shone down. The two of them chatted quietly for a while before Dake asked curiously, "Senior, are you going out tomorrow?" Panduola shook his head. Tonight. Dake was a little surprised. In such a hurry. Panduola smiled and said, "It's a bit far away. Maybe I'll need to apply for leave when school starts." Dake, "I see." Then the Christmas present that he originally wanted to give after midnight would have to be brought forward. He thought for a while and got up. "Let's take a walk upstairs." Panduola turned her head and saw that there were already people appearing one after another. This place was no longer hidden. She got up as well. The two of them chatted as they went up the stairs. Then they came to the window on the 3rd floor of the castle. After coming here several times, Dake found that this was indeed a good view. Lying on the windowsill, he could not only see the night sky and the clock tower, but also the external bridge where a lot of things had happened. He clapped his hands and asked, "Can you summon your familiar?" Although Panduola didn't understand, she still took out her school card and summoned her familiar. Her familiar, which was the little dragon with wings, was called a young winged dragon. It was a type of winged dragon that would never grow up. Dake picked up the familiar, which was as big as the little demon beast, and raised it high. Although the young winged dragon flapped its wings happily, it was only the reaction of a familiar. Under normal circumstances, a familiar only had an intelligence level of 2.5, which was half a level higher than a magic fairy. They belonged to the mid-range simulacrum, and like a normal golem, they didn't have a complete and independent thinking circuit. So at first glance they seemed to be alive, but as long as one interacted with them for a long time, they would realize that they were just artificial creatures. Can you turn around? Dake looked at Panduola and asked again. Panduola looked more and more confused, but because of her trust in Dake, she still turned around. Dake pursed his lips slightly and took out Pride Eye from the card bag he carried with him. This was the first time he used the Great Sin series card on someone else's familiar, Magic Fairy, so he couldn't confirm the effect. According to the original plan, if the effect wasn't satisfactory, he would change the Christmas present. So at this time, he didn't mention the word Christmas present to Panduola. Fortunately, Panduola was cooperative enough, which also saved him a lot of effort. He didn't hold Pride Eye in front of him but hid it behind his back. The Magister had a sense for the magic cards he personally made. As long as he injected a trace of magic power, he would be able to distinguish the type of magic card in an instant when he received feedback. He began to chant the usual summoning spell. 4 seconds later, a dark golden ball of light drilled out of Pride Eye and slowly floated toward the young winged dragon he was holding with his other hand. The young winged dragon looked at the ball of light with wide eyes, without any sense of danger. Until the ball of light drilled into its head, it seemed to have short-circuited and suddenly stopped reacting. Then it suddenly opened its eyes, and a dark golden light bloomed from its eyes. Its slightly stiff facial expression suddenly came to life. Almost in the next moment, it bit Dake's finger. Hiss! Dake felt a sharp pain and quickly let go. The young winged dragon abruptly flew to a high place and cried out, "Iya!" Panduola finally couldn't help but ask, "Can you turn around?" Dake stuffed Pride Eye back into the card bag and said, "Yes." Panduola got the permission and immediately turned around. The young winged dragon that was bossing Dark around suddenly felt a terrifying pressure that seemed to be able to crush it into mud in an instant. That was the suppression of the biological level. It was the absolute dominance of the superior over the inferior. At this moment, the pride provided by Pride Eye could no longer support it to continue holding its head high. It suddenly retracted its tail, turned its head shakily like a tiny lizard, and faced its master. But it was such a humble but real reaction that made Panduola's brows turn from cloudy to clear in an instant. No one understood the demonic spirit better than the master of the demonic spirit. She almost immediately felt the change in the young winged dragon. It was a change that she had often dreamt of when she first summoned her familiar. The cute young winged dragon turned from a demonic spirit into a real creature and became her first family, accompanying her day after day. But as her knowledge of magic became richer, she gradually understood that it was impossible. A demonic spirit was a demonic spirit after all. Not a family. The intelligence level of a demonic spirit seemed to be half a level higher than that of a magic elf, but that was almost the limit. It was impossible to break through in terms of hardware. Mental magi could form a bond with magic elves, but they couldn't form a bond with a demonic spirit. This made her life very difficult during that time. It wasn't until Ms. Bella noticed that her condition wasn't right and took the initiative to contact her that she was lucky enough to find her first family. But now, the dream from 3 years ago seemed to have come true in front of her. She blinked and showed a rare cute expression. Roar! The young winged dragon's last arrogance made it spit out a flame-like dragon breath into the sky. It seemed to want to declare its nobility through this performance. But as the flames scattered like fireworks, its nobility was still incomprehensible. Panduola saw that the demonic spirit, which theoretically had no attack power at all, actually used a skill. At this moment, she suddenly understood the reason why Dake made the curse cage. Maybe I also need a curse cage. Panduola was always used to hiding her overly intense emotions in the bottom of her heart, but she was really excited at this moment. She had just received the best Christmas present. In the blink of an eye, she had broken the record again. She couldn't help but look at Dake. How many surprises would this first-year junior bring her before she would stop? As the surface effect of Pride Eye faded, the young winged dragon finally returned to normal. But its intelligence had been awakened, and it had a complete self-consciousness. Panduola teased the young winged dragon lovingly, using her slender fingers to tease its pink tongue. Her mood was extremely happy. If Dake confessed to her now, she might be happy and say yes. Right, I have to give him a gift in return. Panduola racked her brain to think. Although the Christmas present she originally prepared was very thoughtful, compared to Dake's surprise, it was completely not enough. Or I'll give that. She quickly had an idea. Dake, turn around. Dake didn't expect it to be his turn so soon. He simply turned around and leaned on the windowsill to look down. The external bridge, as far as the eye could see, was indeed a sacred place for dating. In just a short while, there were already 2 pairs of men and women on the bridge. They were one-on-one, and neither of them interfered. They were all whispering and full of affection. Dake looked and thought of the Marine Order that he hadn't seen for a long time. He wondered if those people had recovered. There were a total of 16 people in the Marine Order. Except for Mr. Hai Xing, who was expelled, the other 15 people were still in school. The school didn't announce their identities, and they were also regarded as victims in the public announcement. In fact, it was the same. They were more or less brainwashed by the moon goddess statue. Otherwise, they wouldn't have done those things. After the whole incident was over, the remaining 15 members of the Marine Order returned to their normal school life. Dake also saw the squid Sea Keat more than once. Sea Keat was no longer as gloomy as before. Apart from avoiding him when he saw him, his communication with the other students in the same grade was quite smooth. However, Dake didn't know that the Marine Order hadn't been disbanded. The 15 members were still secretly communicating with each other. But in nature, they had changed from a conspiratorial order to a society-like organization. They gathered once a week to complain to each other and relieve their stress. Professor Shi Erfu secretly observed them. After confirming that they weren't harmful, he let them go. Okay. Panduola's clear voice came from behind him. Dake guessed what kind of surprise it would be, and slowly turned around. Instead, he saw Senior Sister Pandora, who was dressed in pure white, hiding her hands behind her back and looking at him playfully. The young winged dragon, who had just gained sentience, was lying on her shoulder obediently. Here, your Christmas present. After seeing Dake turn around, Panduola stretched out her hand from behind her and spread her 5 fingers in front of him. Dake took a closer look and found that there was a fingernail-sized crescent-shaped silver scale lying quietly in her palm. He couldn't help but ask, "What is this?" Panduola. The dragon's reverse scale. A dragon had a reverse scale. Touching it would infuriate it. This was because the reverse scale was the only soft scale on a dragon's entire body. A large number of nerves grew inside the reverse scale, and the surface was covered with sensors. It was abnormally sensitive. Whether it was the sense of touch, pain, or other senses, it could be magnified several times. This was one of the most important treasures of a dragon. After every dragon shed their skin, even if they threw away all of their dragon skin and scales, they wouldn't leave behind their reverse scale. Therefore, the rarity of a reverse scale far exceeded that of an ordinary dragon's scale. In a sense, this was indeed a precious gift that could be compared to Dake's surprise. Dake stretched out 2 fingers and pinched the dragon scale, observing it carefully. Of course, this was the first time he saw something like a dragon scale, not to mention the reverse scale of a dragon scale. The reverse scale itself wasn't as cold as ordinary scales, and it was slightly soft to the touch. It was said that in history, there was a soft sword that was completely made of a reverse scale. It was light, soft, and indestructible. However, Dake's first thought was that there were millions of dragon breeds or dragon elemental magical spirits. Could he use this dragon's reverse scale as the core material to refine a powerful dragon? In his mind, he didn't consider this silver-white reverse scale as a collector's item. How is it? My Christmas present is sincere enough, right? Panduola teased when she saw how serious he was. Dake was excited. He mimicked Panduola's tone and said, "Of course, this is the best Christmas present I've ever received." Panduola covered her mouth and chuckled. I hope an even better present won't appear immediately. Dake took out a square handkerchief from his card bag and carefully wrapped the reverse scale before putting it in his card bag. After exchanging Christmas presents, the two young men and women leaned against the wall and chatted in low voices. Panduola was very knowledgeable. No matter what she said, it was clear and logical. If he wasn't careful, he couldn't stop. When Dake came back to his senses, it was already 10:30 p.m. Panduola saw that he was constantly looking at the clock tower, so she said, Do you want to go back to the hall first? You seem to have another appointment. 2 in 1 4,000 words. It's the end of the month. Give me all the backlog. It's the last day of the bounty. If I don't give it away today, it'll expire. Make it to the top 10. Chapter 197. Panduola's question was actually quite casual. She didn't care whether Dake had a date or not. Although they got along well, it wasn't to the extent that they needed to care about this. Dake was so outstanding. It would be strange if no one invited him to the Christmas ball. He probably turned down countless invitations to fulfill his promise to her, right? Panduola could guess it with just a little guess. However, some people and some things couldn't be avoided. For example, Deanna, who always hung around Dake. Thinking about it, he still had to deal with that clingy little vixen in the second half of the ball. How pitiful. Remember. https://vipkanchu. Vip in the face of Panduola's question. Dake didn't hide it. Yes, I have to dance with Deanna later. This was obviously a plus. Women were especially concerned about a man lying to them for another woman, even if the two parties didn't have a deep relationship. Panduola smiled and said, Then let's go back. I'm actually a little cold. The dress she was wearing wasn't a thermal one. Once she stopped, she would feel cold. It was just that they were chatting happily and didn't pay attention to it. Dake couldn't help but show a hint of apology. It's my negligence. Panduola raised her hand as if she wanted to touch his forehead, but she stopped halfway and nodded. Don't say it like you're taking care of me. I'm a senior. Okay, senior. Dake raised his arm and emptied it. Panduola took advantage of the situation and held his arm as they prepared to go downstairs. When they returned to the auditorium, at least 1/3 of the people inside were gone. Not all of them were couples. Some people couldn't stand the atmosphere of the ball and wanted to go out for a walk. Then they would often inadvertently eat dog food and choke on it. Some people would take advantage of the atmosphere to ask the person they liked out to confess. If they succeeded, they probably wouldn't come back. If they didn't, they probably wouldn't come back. The tranquility outside the auditorium was like a demon with its mouth wide open, swallowing and digesting the students one by one. But if you think that the auditorium will be peaceful, then you are obviously wrong. Inside there would only be more dog food. The first half of the dance party was from 9 to 10. The second half was from 11 p.m. to 12 p.m. As for the 1 hour between the two rounds, it was more casual. If she liked it, she could go on stage alone and tap dance or something. Of course, most people would find a corner below the stage to eat and drink while laughing and chatting. However, there were also those who were unsettled and couldn't find any joy in it. The White Gouda was one of them. He and Luo Boat placed a piece of magic chess on the table, with a few students watching from the side. However, White kept making mistakes during the game. He would always be distracted when there was movement at the door. Obviously, his mind was not on the magic chess at all. Luo Boat felt that White's chess skills were plummeting. He was very disappointed with his friend who didn't take magic chess seriously. When White made another extremely bad mistake, Luo Boat finally couldn't help but criticize him. Magic chess has a soul. If your heart isn't here, then don't play. It was the first time that White was criticized by Luo Boat, and he couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed. He withdrew his hand and sighed. I want to be alone. Luo Boat shook his head. Don't be so nervous, White. There's a 3-year gap between them. White wanted to agree with him for a moment, but when he remembered that he was also part of the 3-year gap group, he couldn't help but be speechless again. He spent most of the first Christmas dance in his life worrying about gains and losses. It wasn't until the second half of the dance was about to start that White finally saw Panduola and Dake walk in through the front door. The two followed etiquette and held hands. Dake was dressed in black, and Panduola was dressed in white. It was an unusual match. But White noticed the difference in height between the two, which made him feel a little relieved. He had heard more than once that girls didn't like boys who were shorter than them. Maybe the relationship between Panduola and Dake was slightly different from what he thought. Just like Luo Boat said, I shouldn't keep thinking about the worst. White patted his cheeks to wake himself up. Then he saw Dake and Panduola find Diana and Luo C. Panduola sat down on the other side of Luo C. Dake sat on the other side of Diana. The four of them sat side by side. Diana was happy when she saw Dake come back. Luo C was reserved when Panduola sat down. Panduola took the initiative to reach out her hand and said, "Hello, I am Panduola Doragon, 4th year of the School of Magic." Luo C quickly shook her hand and introduced herself. Luo C Flotty, 1st year of the School of Aristocrats. Diana didn't want to be outdone and said, "And me, Diana Great Bear, 1st year of the School of Aristocrats." And so the three of them got to know each other. It was hard to imagine how isolated and unsociable Panduola used to be from this scene. She had grown a lot in 3 years. This was thanks to Bella's care, and also because her job as a librarian gave her the opportunity to interact with people. The current her. She didn't usually like to talk to people, but she had become very talkative. Thus, after a few words, she started chatting with the two girls. Diana was a sociable person, and soon forgot the estrangement. She asked the question that she had been holding back for a long time. "Senior, where did you go?" Panduola knew that she was asking about her and Dake's whereabouts, so she said, "We sat outside for a while, and then stood on the 3rd floor where we could see the bridge." Diana. "That's it." Panduola smiled gently. "What else?" Diana. "No, nothing else." Luo C was sandwiched in the middle, with 3 lines on her forehead. It was 11 o'clock. The second half of the dance started with the sound of the piano. Diana jumped up excitedly. "Next, it's Diana's turn." Dake, who had been listening from the side, slowly stood up. He felt a little helpless about Diana's energy. In fact, he was already a little tired. But he still let Diana hold his arm and walk towards the stage. There were many students who were waiting for this moment. Almost at the same time, pairs of students stepped onto the stage. Diana's excitement was beyond words. She could feel that the atmosphere this time was different from the one on Halloween. Because of the separation between the first half and the second half, the feeling of taking over was less. She seemed to be affected by the atmosphere, and her cheeks were slightly flushed. Her hand that was holding Dake's hand was trembling. She was nervous. This meant that she cared more about dancing with Dake than she did on Halloween. Sometimes, being together all the time would make people tired of each other. But sometimes, being together all the time would make people gradually obsessed with each other as they got to know each other better. Diana obviously belonged to the latter category. Her innocent little thoughts were obvious to see. Dark tried his best to guide her on the correct dance steps, but the thin heels under her feet were a hindrance. After that, Dake didn't care about the dance steps. Instead, he slowly turned in circles with Diana's rhythm. Diana had a lively personality, but when she danced, she was very slow. Time quietly slipped away from her like water. The two of them gradually got some feeling in the slow and leisurely dance steps. After one song, another song followed. After 3 songs, Diana's dance steps were seriously out of shape. Her thin high heels looked like they could break at any time. Dake led her off the stage. He gave the stage to someone who needed it more. Diana gradually came back to her senses as she walked off the stage. In addition to excitement, there was also endless aftertaste in her eyes. Tonight's Christmas ball would definitely leave the most important mark in her memory. The two of them returned to their previous seats. Deanna had a satisfied look on her face as she played with Luo C. Dake looked past them and connected with Panduola. He saw the words, "Thank you for your hard work." Actually, it wasn't that hard. If Deanna could change her high heels, he might be immersed in the slow dance steps where he felt the passage of time. It was really a different mood. After sitting down this time, Dake thought that he could rest for a long time. Unexpectedly, it didn't take long before he saw another girl walking towards him. It was Aima. She lowered her head and moved her lips quickly. If they were close enough, they should be able to hear her complaining. "It took me so much effort to put on makeup. Wouldn't it be a loss if I don't use it? Just once. If I'm rejected, there won't be a next time." She was shy and didn't have her usual clean and straightforward manner. Panduola glanced at Dake. "Your business is here again." Dake scratched his head. This was another dance that he had to do. "Don't get me wrong. I just want to try dancing at the Christmas ball, but I can't find a suitable dance partner." Aima pouted. Dake smiled and said, "Okay, miss. It's my honor to be chosen by you." Then the two of them stepped onto the stage at the same time. Without the Swan Princess and the Human Prince, the second half of the ball felt like something was missing. However, this didn't stop the students from being immersed in it. Aima's dance steps were very standard, as if they were a template. Dake followed her wishes and finished the song. When the song ended, Aima's heart was in turmoil. She wanted to dance again, but she didn't want to trouble the other party too much. Just as she was thinking about this, Dake had already walked off the stage. The second half of the ball came to an end in the blink of an eye. After Aima walked off the stage, it seemed like a big stone in her heart was suddenly lifted. She didn't return to the crowd of the Knights Institute. Instead, she sat down on the other side of Dake. The clock at 12 quietly came and went as they chatted. Dong. Unknowingly, Christmas Eve passed. When the solemn clock rang, couples nestled in the corners, lovers who were crying in the shadows, and boys and girls who were leisurely taking a stroll returned to the auditorium one after another. After Principal Aerti stepped onto the stage, the last program of the Christmas ball officially began. Little fairies flew out of her hand and delivered various Christmas socks to everyone's hands. This was the unique wishing device of the Academy. It was said that if you could hold it in until 5 in the morning on Christmas Day, you could receive this year's Christmas gift. It was usually very surprising. Dake looked at the zebra-striped sock in his hand and resisted the urge to immediately open it. "It's about time." Panduola shook the sock in her hand and said to Dake, "I have to go." Dake blurted out, "I'll send you off." There was no extra speech, and the Christmas ball ended just like that. The students who received their socks walked out of the auditorium one after another. Many of them had endured until now and were actually quite tired. If they could return to their beds, they would definitely fall asleep. Dake also felt physically and mentally exhausted, but he still insisted on sending Panduola back to the Mage Academy. "Have a safe trip." Looking at Panduola running across the bridge, Dake took a deep breath. The winter night air was very cold, and it was as cold as ice. Panduola suddenly turned around and said, "See you in the new semester." "See you." Dake waved his hand and turned around to leave. On the way back, Deanna and Luo C, who were waiting by the wall, met up with him. Dake's face showed a hint of a shy smile and he said softly, "Let's go." Deanna and Luo C giggled and moved to his two sides. The three of them walked together to the tower of the noble house. Back to when the clock was just about to strike 12. In the depths of the secret passage, in an unknown place. Unknowingly, a blood magic array had been drawn on the ground. Countless bats rushed towards the magic array like a swarm of bees. One after another they crashed into the magic array, and even the blood that splashed out was swallowed by the magic array. Then a blood-red light emerged from the magic array. After 12 it was Christmas. It was the time when the saint was born. It was the time when all living things came back to life. Everything was going on quietly. In the beginning, it was a bat that entered the secret passage. That bat wasn't the boss of the Halloween event, the vampire count. It was only one of his 10 million incarnations. In theory, the vampire count could be reborn in any bat's body. This was the most troublesome part about it, and the main reason why no one was able to catch it during the event. But at the moment the event ended, the vampire count had already disappeared. Its original form was a one-time use magic elf card, which was the masterpiece of Professor Kazair. It was impossible for it to cause any residual damage. With the destruction of the vampire count, all his bat incarnations disappeared one by one. Except for the bat that entered the secret passage by mistake. It was the only bat that survived. The reason for its survival was unknown. But since it didn't disappear, it meant that it was no longer an ordinary creature. After that, the news of the secret passage spread. Groups of students rushed into the secret passage. The lower grades who lacked awareness became its target. The students who were bitten by it became tired, which also led to the students being late. The bat that succeeded in sucking the blood of the students changed. It gradually learned to split and atomize, and more bats appeared in the secret passage. Everything developed to this point. The bats even absorbed the blood of the hero's son. The final change was also caused by this. The bats that absorbed the blood of the white turned from predatory creatures to vampires with true self-awareness. They recovered some fragmented memories. Dong! When the clock struck 12, a human body dripping with blood drilled out of the blood magic formation. When the Dake trio returned to the dormitory, White Gouda was still outside. He and Luo Boat had a bit of a quarrel, so they didn't return to the dormitory together after the dance party. White walked alone in the castle and subconsciously stayed outside. There was no curfew during the holidays. The golem wouldn't give him a warning. It didn't matter even if he strolled around until 1 or 2 o'clock. He gradually walked to the familiar external bridge. It was here that he had awakened the pink mist sleeping into the abyss. He couldn't help but take out Taboo Love. He looked at the blurry human body on the card and wanted to transform the human body into Panduola's appearance like how he used the flower card. But as he injected magic power, the human body began to change shape. He retracted his finger. It was meaningless. It was meaningless to do this. On the contrary, he felt a sense of sadness. He remembered that he had wanted to use Taboo Love to check the favorability of Panduola a long time ago. But for various reasons, he hadn't been able to do it. So much so that he had almost forgotten about it. I'll find a way to peek after I give her the Christmas present. After all, I gave her a present, so her favorability shouldn't be too bad. Thinking about it, White became more and more depressed. In the second half of the dance party, he could summon up the courage to ask Panduola to dance with him, but in the end he could only watch. And Dake dimming. He obviously got the chance to dance with Panduola, but he still wasn't satisfied. He even invited other girls to dance in the second half of the dance party. That was so enviable. So despicable. White was indignant. The more he thought about it, the angrier he became. If it weren't for the fact that he didn't have any alcohol, he would have quickly evolved into a drunkard. His emotions gradually accumulated to the extreme. White leaned on the railing of the bridge and roared at the sky. Unknowingly, when he stopped to catch his breath, a hand was placed on his shoulder. Noble House Tower. After dark returned to the dormitory. He endured the mental exhaustion and washed up. After that, he lay down in the bathtub and fell asleep. Half an hour later, he was suddenly awakened by the cold. He quickly got up, took a shower and crawled into the warm bed. Early the next morning, Dake slept until he woke up naturally. He stared at the clock on the opposite wall for a long time before he said, "It's Christmas. It's Christmas. I wonder how senior sister Pandora is doing after rushing through the night." How did Claire and Yvette spend Christmas Eve last night? After clearing his thoughts, Dake suddenly remembered the Christmas stocking hanging at the end of his bed. Even though he knew that there wouldn't be anything too expensive in the stocking, Dake still opened it with anticipation. The surprise of opening a treasure chest only came from the process of unlocking it. There was actually an apple in Dake's Christmas stocking. Christmas Eve is already over. Why are you still giving me an apple? However, this disposable Christmas stocking could be kept as a collector's item. Woo! After being awakened by Dake's actions, the little devil suddenly jumped up after a short moment of confusion. Damn it, it's Christmas. Great little devil, you actually forgot that it's Christmas today. It crawled out of the bed, flapped its wings, and flew to the corner full of presents. After waiting for so long, it was finally time to open the presents. Since it would look at it once or twice a day, the little fiendish magical beast was very clear about the location of its Christmas present. It directly grabbed the gift box with its claws, dragged it outside, and tore the packaging open in a few seconds. Then it closed its eyes and prayed for a while before it tore the packaging open. Suddenly, a thick coffee-colored scarf appeared in its field of vision. The little devil used its claws to grab the scarf, then flew in front of Dake, pointed at the scarf with its other claws, and stared at Dake eagerly. Dake took out the apple from the Christmas stocking and placed it on the table, then turned around and took the scarf from the little devil's claws. Using the base of the little devil's wings as a support, he wrapped the scarf around its chin. Although wearing the scarf like this would cause inconvenience on its wings, the little devil clearly preferred the scarf and didn't care about the inconvenience on its wings at all. It began to wear the scarf and walk in front of the kittygrass, foxgrass and milkweed, walking in circles like an old general showing off a new sword in his hand. Okay, stop fooling around. Dark stretched out his hand from behind and picked up the little demonic beast. Next, the task of delivering the chocolate will be left to you. After the little devil heard the order, not only did it not reject, but its eyes lit up and it nodded. No problem, leave it to me. This was obviously a good opportunity to show off the scarf. In addition to the chocolate gift box for each of the Noble Academy students, Dake had a lot of gifts to give. He wasn't in a hurry. Instead, he ate breakfast in the dormitory, rested for a while, and then went out. It was already 8 o'clock in the morning. If he knocked on the door at this time, most people would be awake. In Dake's hand was the Christmas candy gift bag that he bought from the candy store last time, the beautifully packaged signed edition of Claire's Weekly Travels, and the button eyes of a teddy bear. He quickly came to Deanna's dormitory door and knocked on the door. Who is it? Deanna was half sitting on the bed. She was just woken up by the little devil who came to give her the chocolate gift box. She wanted to go back to sleep. When she finally opened the door with difficulty, it was already a few minutes later. Deanna, who was only wearing her teddy bear pajamas, subconsciously wanted to close the door. But Dake stuck out a foot and blocked the door. He squinted his eyes and looked at Deanna and teased. The sun is already shining on your butt, still not getting up? Deanna. I can't get up. 3 in 1, 6,000 words, plus 3 chapters. Chapter 198. Dake looked at the lazy and coquettish Deanna. He shook the Christmas candy gift in his hand and asked with a smile, "Do you mean you don't want your Christmas present?" Deanna covered her mouth and said in surprise, "Isn't the Christmas present the chocolate box?" She licked the corner of her mouth as if she was savoring the sweetness and bitterness of the chocolate. Dake said, "That is a present for everyone in class. And this is the only one for you." Deanna, the only one. Deanna's radar instantly scanned the keywords. She opened her eyes wide and no longer felt sleepy. Her eyes were as bright as the moon. It was not the first time Dake came to Deanna's bedroom. The poor panda familiar was still playing the role of a doll in the corner. The little dress it was wearing was getting more and more fancy. "Is this the Christmas present for me?" Deanna grabbed the candy gift and her eyes were filled with excitement. The website was https://vipcanshu. Obviously, the candy gift was much more attractive to her than the other present in Dake's hand. Dake looked at her helplessly. Then he twisted the button-like eye and waved it in front of her eyes. "Button, what's wrong?" She was confused. Dake had to explain. "This is the prize I got from the Halloween costume party. It is the eye of a zombie doll bear. If you use it well, it may be a great way for you to get a 4-star magical elf." 4-star. Deanna's eyes lit up. "Then I will." Dake frowned and said seriously. "Study it carefully. You are too exaggerated." Deanna said. "Girl's word." After reminding Deanna not to use the precious bear eye, Dake left with Claire's weekly travels. Next is Luosi. He turned and walked to Luosi's room and patted it lightly. The sound was transmitted into the bedroom through the door. Luosi obviously reacted faster than Deanna. Although she was also wearing pajamas, her bangs had already been combed. Dake didn't go into her bedroom. Instead, he took out Claire's travels and handed it to her. "This is Professor Claire's travel book. It's signed." Luosi immediately showed great interest. She asked, "Would you like to come in and have a seat first? I have a Christmas present for you too." Dake had originally planned to leave after sending him off, but after some consideration, he still walked in. Luosi's cat Grass dragged its round body over, and Dake couldn't help but put it on his lap and stroke it. This Garfield cat was so meaty that it felt especially good to touch. There was no need to worry about getting sick from being too fat. It was simply the best in the world. Luosi knew that Dake had 3 pots of cat grass in his bedroom. He was a real cat lover. She took out a gift box from the drawer and pushed it in front of Dake. Dake looked at it carefully. He felt that the gift box was just the right size to put 2 books, but it obviously didn't contain books. What could it be? Guessing before revealing the Christmas present was one of the great joys of Christmas. However, Dake guessed several times, and Luosi said that it was wrong. She blushed and stopped Dake from opening the gift box. "Let's go back and see." Dake didn't understand, but he did as she said. As soon as he went out, he saw Deanna opening the door and looking out. Deanna saw him and waved at him. "Dake, I haven't given you your present yet." "Ah." Speaking of Deanna's present, Dake couldn't help but recall Deanna's sudden question last night. "Dake, do you like bears?" He couldn't help but have an ominous feeling. She won't really give me a bear plushie, will she? From entering to leaving the house, Dake took a total of 2 minutes. He didn't have a bear plushie in his hands, but he had a bear pillow. Deanna gave him a bear pillow the size of his body. What the F***CK? Dake took advantage of the empty corridor and ran back to the dormitory with the bear pillow in his arms. If someone saw him like this, his heroic image as the son of a duke would be ruined. When he got back to the dormitory, he threw the bear pillow on the bed and picked up Luosi's present. The gift box was flat and square. What's in it? When Dark recalled Rose's flushed cheeks as if she had drunk alcohol, he felt that the things inside were definitely not simple. However, after he opened the box, he found that it was just a set of thermal underwear. One gives a pillow, the other gives underwear. Dake didn't have the energy to complain. He thought about how to send AI Ma's Christmas present to the Night Academy. It would be great if I could meet her in the library. But it's Christmas now. No matter how hard she studies, she still has time to rest. Maybe it's a good idea to let the little magical beast go in from the balcony. He glanced at the little magical beast and felt that it would work. The present for AI Ma was a box of apple juice. It was very heavy. Dake tied a rope to the box so that the little magical beast could use its claws to grab it more easily. However, it didn't have enough strength to fly. After a while, it couldn't move anymore. It was easy to solve this problem. Dake took out Pride Eye. Under the effect of Pride Eye, the little magical beast's strength increased for 15 minutes. It was more than enough to pull the box of juice. But before that, he needed the Dilu beast to help move it. After finalizing the plan, Dake walked to the tower of the Night Academy. When he reached the front of the tower, he summoned the little magical beast and used Pride Eye on it. The little fiendish beast, which had gone from being powerless to having the strength to truss a chicken, finally managed to grab the juice and fly up in a wobbly manner. The first-year students lived on the second floor. It was easy to find AI Ma's dormitory. Sure enough, in less than 10 minutes, the little magical beast completed its task. Did I give it to the wrong person? Dake was worried. The little magical beast patted its chin and said, I, the little magical beast, have never made a mistake. Dake. However, Emma had woken up an hour ago. When the little magical beast flew to her house with a box, she was wearing fluffy otter pajamas and reading on the balcony. She was shocked. Then she opened the balcony's grill and moved the box of apple juice in with the little magical beast. Tastes surprisingly good. Is this really handmade? AI Ma tasted the apple juice and felt that it was incredible. In her impression, Dake was almost omnipotent. But there was a limit to being omnipotent, right? How could he make juice taste so good? She felt that she fell in love with the taste of the apple juice. But after drinking it, AI Ma had to face a serious question. What should she give in return? Dake returned to the dormitory and counted the last gift list. There's still Professor Ka Zaire, Professor Li Li, and Professor Shi Erfa left. Let's give them all. At this time, the probability of the professors staying in the dormitory was higher. Dake summoned the Dilu beast again and left with the 3 gifts. He was very familiar with the way to the professor's dormitory and he had the keycard left by Claire. Dake found Professor Ka Zaire's dormitory first. He had a good relationship with Professor Ka Zaire, but of course this was the first time he visited his dormitory. Knock knock knock. Who is it? The professor's voice came from inside. He sounded very awake. Dake said, It's me, Professor. Dimming. Professor Ka Zaire opened the door and revealed a crack. After seeing that it was really Dake, he said in surprise, Why are you here? Dake took a small gift box from the Dilu beast and shook it in front of Professor Ka Zaire. Merry Christmas, Professor. Professor Ka Zaire touched his messy hair and sighed. Merry Christmas. Then he opened the door a little more. Just enough for one person to pass through. Dake walked into the room and looked around. Professor Ka Zaire's room was surprisingly clean, but every piece of furniture was one size smaller. He put the book The Old Knight of the Border on the table and said, Professor, do you like reading novels? Professor Ka Zaire shook his head. Occasionally. Dake pointed at his head and smiled. Then read more. Good novels are good for divergent thinking. Ka Zaire couldn't help but grin. Are you saying that I'm stubborn? Dark laughed dryly, thinking that the professor was indeed a professor. He could even tell something like this. Ka Zaire shook his head. I don't usually read novels, but since it's a Christmas gift from you, I'll finish reading it. Alright, wait, I have something here that I can give you in return. Dake asked curiously. What is it? Professor Ka Zaire. Wait. Then, he rummaged through the cabinets and finally found a ring. The ring was small and made of black metal with 3 holes. Seeing the arrangement of the 3 holes, Dake immediately thought of a bowling ball. Well, it was a magic ball. Professor Ka Zaire tossed the ring over and said, This is a magic ring. You can use it to train how to conduct magic power remotely and manipulate a magic ball remotely. Dake caught the ring and observed it carefully. Judging from its texture, it was indeed very similar to a magic ball. He didn't expect it to be a related item. He hesitated and said, Isn't the conduction of magic power a subject for the 2nd year? Is there a problem with my studies? Professor Ka Zaire glanced at him. You have plenty of extraordinary items on you, don't you? Don't worry, you have enough magic power for the training. As for the specific method, you'll have to do it yourself. B. Dake put away the magic ring. I'll look it up in the library. Professor Kazair nodded in satisfaction and was about to see him out. Dake tactfully left first. Then, Professor, I have to visit Professor Li, so I won't stay any longer. Kazair waved his hand. Go. Dake. /buy. A novel in exchange for a magic ring. It was a great deal. Dake's mood immediately improved. Professor Li and Professor Shi Erfu's dorms were on the other side. He walked for a while and found the room marked, Heartsuit Li Heartsuit. I don't know why, but I feel like I'm helping a tyrant by giving her wine. Dake shook his head and knocked on Professor Li's door. Unsurprisingly, no one responded after knocking for a long time. He stood at the door and mumbled. Then there are two possibilities. One, she's not here, and the other, she's drunk again. The latter is more likely, right? Little devil. Little devil immediately obeyed. Coconut Sir Scout come out. Dake. Go. The little devil beast wore its beloved scarf and flapped its wings to fly around. It came to the balcony and saw the little goblin lying on the table drunk like a dead pig. She's so worrisome. Little devil shook his head and scolded, then immediately went back to report. Dake glanced at the door lock and made a difficult choice between entering or not. In the end, he had no choice but to enter. Professor Li, are you done? I'm coming in. If you don't answer, I'll take it as a yes. Magic summoning. 100 transformations universal lock. Get tick. Gotcha. He opened the door a crack. A strong stench of alcohol gushed out from the crack of the door as if it had finally found a vent. Dake quickly covered his nose and bravely rushed in, risking his life to die from the smell. The romantic atmosphere of the Christmas party was a fatal poison for Li. She didn't wait for the ball to end and returned to the dormitory early. She touched the flower card alone and drank to drown her sorrows. She drank herself from a fragrant little vixen to a stinky little vixen. This wasn't the first time Dake had to deal with this situation, but today's situation was especially bad. Not only did she get drunk, she also knocked over the wine bottle. There were remnants of alcohol on the table, floor, and everywhere. The alcohol on her body had already dried, making her dress wrinkled. Dake frowned and had to summon Trash Slime to quickly deal with it. After Trash Slime cleaned up the alcohol, he also neatly arranged the wine bottles. This made her look a lot more comfortable. You really don't let people have peace of mind. Dake stretched out his hand and stroked Li's wrinkled dragonfly wings. He turned to Dilu Beast and said, "So I'll leave the rest to you, is that okay?" Dilu Beast spoke in human language. "Of course." Dake nodded and said, "Then I'll go out first." Little Devil Beast. Little Devil Beast immediately followed. One person and one pet guarded outside the door. Inside the door, the Dilu Beast easily moved Professor Lily to the sofa. Then, it took off her clothes that were full of wine stains and took out a set of pajamas from the wardrobe as a backup. Then it threw the dirty clothes into the laundry basket and moved Professor Lily into the bathroom to wash her. Finally, after a quarter of an hour, the smelly little devil beast returned to her fragrant state. Dilu Beast changed her into her pajamas and threw her into the bed. Little Lily, who was treated roughly, was still drunk like a dead pig and didn't have any reaction. Dilu Beast pinched its nose and sniffed. It found the deodorant and sprayed it all around the room. Then it opened the windows to ventilate everything in one go. When Dake and Little Devil Beast entered the room again, the whole room had changed. It finally had a bit of a warm home smell. Sigh. Dake sighed and put the morning dew with a Christmas card on the bedside table. It took one last look at Lily and helplessly left the room. Slip away, slip away. There's only one left, Professor Shi Erfu. Among all the professors, Professor Shi Erfu could be said to be the hardest to get along with. She always had a straight face and was used to using the silence card. She was hard to communicate with from head to toe. Dake's relationship with her was quite ordinary, so he didn't plan to give her a Christmas gift. To be honest, it would be a bit awkward to suddenly visit an unfamiliar teacher. But since he accepted the mission worth 3,000 credits, Dake still had a certain professional integrity. He looked at the remaining bottle of green wine in his hand and estimated the relationship between Simmons and Professor Shi-Erfu. He wondered if he would be cursed by the wind spirit if he gave out this bottle of wine. But after he pondered for a while, the door to Professor Shi-Erfu's dormitory opened automatically. A slightly lazy voice came from inside. "You're standing outside without knocking. Did you do something bad and want to turn yourself in but don't dare to?" Professor Shi-Erfu was someone who would say something like this. Dake suddenly felt that he didn't really know anything about this professor after this semester. Was it because she always used a rigid attitude to hide herself? "Professor." Dake didn't think too much about it and closed the door after he entered. "Merry Christmas." "Merry Christmas. Well, it's been a long time since a student came to give me a Christmas gift." Professor Shi-Erfu looked at the bag in Dake's hand and felt somewhat gratified. Dake raised the magic ring on his finger and turned it. They don't know what a blessing can be exchanged for. Professor Shi-Erfu chuckled. "Then what else did you get besides this old ring?" "The smell of alcohol from Li Li." Dake could clearly feel that Professor Shi-Erfu seemed to be a completely different person during the holidays. He said helplessly, "What a loss, what a loss." Professor Shi-Erfu raised his finger and said, "Take out my gift and take a look. I'll try my best to give you something of equal value." Dake took the opportunity to take out the indigo wine from the gift bag. The green liquid swayed slightly and reflected a faint light under the sunlight. Professor Shi-Erfu's expression froze. When he came back to his senses, his face was already stern again. "Where did you get this wine?" Dake knew that she would ask this question. According to the previous plan, Simmons only hoped that Professor Shi-Erfu could drink the indigo wine that he brewed himself, and he would be satisfied. Therefore, he asked him to make up a small tavern here. After all, the indigo wine was a cheap wine that could be bought anywhere. However, Dake didn't want to do that, because it wasn't part of the mission. He said solemnly, "Uncle Simmons from Traveler Street begged me to give it to you." Shi-Erfu frowned. "He's still in that smelly corner." Dake thought for a moment and said, "He said that he would always be there." The corners of Shi-Erfu's eyes twitched. He turned his head and looked out the window. From Dake's angle, he couldn't see her eyes anymore. She said sternly, "Take the wine back and tell him to get lost." Dake shook his head and said, "I can't do that. I accepted his reward. I can't return it." Professor Shi-Erfu, "What reward?" "I'll give it to you." Dake, "Morning dew, 8 desolation." Professor Shi-Erfu instantly turned around and said in astonishment, "He actually gave you these 2 bottles of wine?" Dake was startled. He saw that the corners of her eyes were a little red, and he knew what was going on. Dake, "Morning dew comforts the sorrow of love. 8 desolation gifts the hero. Green seed connects the family." Shi-Erfu thought for a moment. "You gave them to Li Li and Claire respectively." Dake, "Professor, you can do that." Professor Sylph's tone suddenly softened. "Leave the wine. I'll give it to you as a Christmas present." As she spoke, she flicked her finger. A gust of wind whirled and flew to Dake's palm. Dake closed his fingers, and the gust of wind with a green glow came out of his fingers. Professor Shi-Erfu explained, "That's the blessing of the wind spirit. It can help you withstand a disaster." As he spoke, the gust of wind entered between Dake's eyebrows, leaving only a bit of coolness. Dake suddenly realized that his hearing had become much clearer. No wonder Professor Shi-Erfu knew it was him just by standing outside the door. This gust of wind was priceless. The wind spirit should belong to the flight system, right? If I refine it, what can I refine? After leaving the teacher's dormitory, Dake couldn't help but think. But just as this thought came to his mind, he suddenly heard a gust of wind coming down from above. This made him subconsciously take a few steps forward. Then there was a paw sound. Something thrown from the sky. A black shadow flashed upstairs. The wine danced with the dregs of the bottle at his feet. Dake didn't feel good. This was the green seed wine. Professor Shi-Erfu first gave him a gust of wind blessing, and then threw the green seed wine down from above. If it wasn't for his quick reaction, wouldn't that strand of priceless blessing of wind have been wasted in vain? What kind of hatred caused this father and daughter tragedy? Dake still had lingering fears and decided not to get involved for the time being. Anyway, the lifespan of the elves was long enough. Let the father and daughter slowly grind it out. Time to leave. Afternoon. Dake appeared in a small tavern in the corner of Traveller Street. Simmons seemed to be waiting for his good news. But he could only bring bad news. You're saying that she smashed the wine. Dake originally thought that Simmons would be flustered and exasperated, but not only was he not angry, he was even dancing with joy. All right. After saying okay 3 times, Simmons wanted to close the door and drink. Dake could not help but ask, "So what's so good about it?" Simmons laughed loudly and said, "Everything is good." You know what? This was the first time in many years that she had such a big reaction to something I gave her. Well done, well done. Dark. Smashed to the max. Simmons. Yes, awesome, awesome. Dake. Coo, coo, coo. Simmons. Goo, 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 goo. Dake. Crazy, this person is crazy. 3 in 1, 6,000 words. Although there were some twists and turns in the process since yesterday morning, there have been 22,000 words and 9 chapters, so this month. Chapter 199. No matter what, at least Simmons himself looked quite happy. Perhaps to him, this was already the best Christmas present. Dake quietly left the tavern. The Christmas celebration in Traveller Street was unprecedentedly grand. It was packed with people since noon. Walking on a slightly more secluded path, his ears were still filled with the endless laughter of the crowd. But at this moment, his heart gradually calmed down. Although the war had ended, the remaining sorrow did not stop. The peace and laughter today were exchanged for by the sacrifice of the older generation. Whether it was Professor Li Li or Professor Shi-Erfu, they all left behind irreparable regrets. The weather on Christmas was unexpectedly good. Remember the website, Vipkanshu. When Dake returned to the dormitory, he was stopped by someone in the common lounge. Dake dimming, someone gave you a gift. The second-year girl named Mary was reading on the sofa with her long legs crossed. After stopping him, she pointed to the 2 gifts on the table. Dake walked over in surprise and said politely, "Thank you, senior." Mary made a gesture of thanks and then continued to read her book. Dake picked up the 2 gifts from the table and was a little curious. Who else would give me a Christmas present? One of the gifts he could think of was AI Ma's return gift, but he had no idea about the other one. It couldn't be Eudora, right? But Eudora was a classmate of the Aristocrat Academy. She shouldn't need this senior to pass it on, right? So who gave it to him? Dake didn't open it immediately. Instead, he found a seat in the common lounge and sat down. At this time, most of the students were playing in Traveller Street. The common lounge was very empty, and he didn't have to worry about being disturbed. He put the 2 gift boxes on the table and picked them out in a good mood. The gift on the left was a square box wrapped in pink. It was a little girly. It was very likely AI Ma's. The gift on the right was wrapped in a Christmas gift box. It was quite heavy. Of course, the surprise has to be left for later. Dake picked the pink gift and then opened the packaging, revealing a gift box. He opened it again, revealing a smaller gift box. He opened it again, revealing a smaller gift box. Then he opened it again. Trying to play this game with me? Black lines appeared on Dake's forehead. In the end, he opened 9 boxes in a row before he saw the real gift. It was an ancient gold coin. This ancient gold coin was not standard enough, but the material used was very special. The portrait on the front was a little blurry, but one could vaguely make out that it was wearing a crown. It should be the king of that time. On the back, there was a building similar to a golden pagoda, which reminded people of the 8 murals. Everything made sense now. The 8 murals did not appear out of thin air. It was because Ai Ma entered the secret passage that the mural appeared. Dark was just a third party who had interfered. He frowned slightly and picked up the Christmas card under the gold coins. On the small card, there was a simple drawing of the image of a Christmas girl, and beside it was the name, Ai Ma Métis, written in ancient characters. Sure enough, it's a gift from Ai Ma. This is bad. The value of this ancient gold coin was much more valuable than a box of apple juice. He could not accept an unequal gift from someone of the same age. However, it's not good to be too calculative about a Christmas gift. I'll think of a way to repay it in the future. He put away the Christmas card and the ancient gold coin. Dake's gaze turned to another gift. Not to mention anything else, this gift was really valuable. He did not look at it anymore and directly opened the gift box. This time there weren't any strange designs. There was a whole set of books lying quietly in the gift box. It was the super best-selling book series, Alibaba's 14 Ways to Slay a Dragon. And from the 1st to the 7th, there were a total of 7 books. Who gave this to me? Dake was a little surprised. He immediately picked up the Christmas card that was placed on top of the book. It was a very ordinary storefront style, the same type of gift Dake received when he bought things. He opened the Christmas card and saw the names of the donors. White and Luo Boat. Dake looked at it repeatedly and confirmed that it was indeed a gift from the two of them. He could not help but be surprised. Have they not given up on improving my favorability? No matter what, he had to give something in return. Dake thought for a while and put the whole set of Alibaba's 14 Ways to Slay a Dragon in his dorm before leaving again. That night, when White and Luo Boat returned from Traveler Street, they received a gift from Dake from a classmate. The two of them looked at each other, took the gift into White's dorm, and stared at it for a long time. Luo Boat said hesitantly, "We received a Christmas gift?" White nodded slightly and said bitterly, "Yes, it's the first gift other than ours." Luo Boat suddenly realized, "That's not right. As long as we give a gift, we will get a gift in return. Why should we wait for others to give us a gift first?" White. In fact, even the set of Alibaba's 14 Ways to Slay a Dragon was given to Dake by accident. White had thought about using a Christmas gift to gain Dake's favorability 2 months ago, but because of the crisis of trust in taboo love, he gradually forgot about it. So he originally wanted to give this set of super popular books to Panduola as a Christmas gift. But after he finally mustered up the courage to ask a senior from the Magic Institute, he learned that Panduola had gone on a long trip last night. Naturally, he could not give her the gift. Christmas gifts were time-sensitive, so if they could not be given today, they would lose their meaning. White was very disappointed. But since he had already bought the gift, he could not just throw it away, right? Thanks to Luo Boat's reminder, he remembered the mission to unlock favorability. As long as he raised Dake's favorability to 80, he would unlock a reward. Even though he did not want to give the gift to Dake at the time, under Luo Boat's urging, he still gave it to Dake. But he did not expect Dake to give him a gift in return so quickly, one for each of them. Luo Boat. What kind of gift is this? White. It looks like a book. Luo Boat thought for a bit and said, "Because we gave him a book, he gave us a book. That's reasonable." White. Let's not guess, just open it and see. Luo Boat. Together. White. Yes. So the two solemnly opened the two gifts at the same time. Instantly, nothing happened. There were indeed books in the gift box. The two read out the title of the book at the same time. Luo Boat. Dake Diming's Notes on Magic Potions. White. Dake Diming's Notes on Arithmetic. Add a chapter that was updated yesterday. Add a character design as compensation. Poor author, please don't complain. The design has been melted down. Chapter 200. This. White and Luo Boat were both stunned. The two of them had many guesses, but never would they have thought that Dake's Christmas gift would be 2 notebooks. Luo Boat asked in astonishment, "Why would he give us notebooks?" White's face turned ugly. "Maybe he thinks this is what we need." Luo Boat shrugged. "He definitely doesn't know how hard we studied when we were locked up. These notebooks are of limited use to us." Victor flipped open the arithmetic notes in his hand and said, "This is a photocopy. The original should be the notes he made during class. From the beginning of the first class to the end of the last class. I'm afraid this is the entire semester's worth of arithmetic notes." But as he flipped through the pages, he suddenly went silent. Luo Boat was puzzled. "What's wrong, White?" "White, I don't understand." Luo Boat, "What?" White, "I actually don't understand. It's clearly the notes from the first semester, but I can't understand them." "No way." Luo Boat also hurriedly flipped through the potioneering notes in his hand. In the beginning, it was fine as it was just a normal excerpt from the blackboard. But later on, there was suddenly a lot of knowledge that was beyond the scope of the syllabus. From this notebook, they could clearly feel that Dake's potioneering skills were rapidly improving. If they could thoroughly study this notebook, they would definitely benefit a lot. "White." Luo Boat looked at White and hesitated. "Although it's amazing, we'll learn these things in the second semester, right?" White thought for a bit and nodded. "Probably. It would be too exaggerated if it was more than a grade." Luo Boat sighed. "Then we'll just have to pay attention in class next semester. I really can't study by myself with a notebook." White, "Me too. Also, I have things to do tomorrow." Luo Boat, "What things to do?" White, "Enter the secret passage again. In the tower of the noble house." Dake was reading Ali Baba's 14 Dragon Slayer Styles with some interest. After he received this gift, he thought for a bit and went to Traveller Street to print 2 copies of the notebook to give to White and Luo Boat. Gifts naturally had to be given to someone who needed them. As for what Victor and Robert would do with the gifts after receiving them, that was none of his business. At this moment, as the first-year students of the Aristocrat Academy returned from Traveller Street one after another, he had received a large number of additional Christmas presents. Although they were all chocolates, candies, biscuits, cookies, and other things, the amount of Christmas gifts was enormous. So much so that he was already considering whether he should call Diana over to deal with it. He thought carefully. There were 4 most useful gifts he had received this Christmas, and they were as follows. 1. Reverse Scale Magic Ring Blessing of the Wind 4. Ancient gold coins. In terms of quality, it could only be described as a good harvest. But Dake always felt that he was missing something. He tapped the book and was a little distracted. This Ali Baba's 14 Dragon Slayer Styles was a story that happened in an ancient civilization in the last century. Ali Baba, a poor woodcutter, accidentally stumbled into the Fairy King's maze on his way to cut firewood. He went through hardships, broke out of the maze, and also got the treasure of the Fairy King. 14 dragons, who had been eyeing the treasure of the Fairy King, heard the news and came. In order to protect the city, which was threatened by the dragons, Ali Baba had to use the treasure of the Fairy King and kill the 14 dragons in 14 ways. The whole story was clear, the structure simple, but the narrative was vivid. There was a detailed description of the cultural background and the harsh environment at that time. It was not only a best-selling story, but also an exquisite book that could take readers into the book world and experience the rise and fall of ancient countries. Through the surface of entertainment, one could learn a lot from the inside. After Dake finished the first episode, he closed his eyes and savored it. 2 minutes later, he opened his eyes and was ready to continue watching the second episode. But just as he opened the second episode to the table of contents, a little light flew in from outside the window and went straight into the half-open ventilation window. Dake glanced at it and let down his guard. It was a griffin-like elf, one of the major elves of the principal of Aertii. At the academy assignment ceremony, it was this elf who gave him the academy card, so he had a deep impression of it. "What's the matter?" Dake's tone was quite gentle. The griffin elf circled around the room a little, as if to confirm that there was nothing indecent. After confirming, it flew back to Dake and began to glow and transform. As the glowing body grew longer and longer, a breathtaking body stretched out. The principal of Aertii appeared in front of Dake. Even without makeup, she was still beautiful. "Merry Christmas, Dimming." The principal of Aertii spoke through this temporarily transformed body. Dake finally remembered what he had missed. He shrugged and said, "A belated greeting, Principal." "Well, Merry Christmas." The principal of Aertii pushed the silver hair that fell on her chest to the back of her head, a trace of tiredness appearing on her face. "Sorry, I've been very busy recently. So you weren't the real you last night. You're really something, Cynthia." Aertii. Dark suddenly noticed the hua point. Suddenly, there was something stuck in his throat that he had to spit out. The principal of Aertii ignored his strange expression and asked with concern, "Did you find the treasure left by a vet?" Dake shook his head. "I'm going to look for it tomorrow. It's a good way to pass the time." Aertii. That's reasonable. Dark. Why don't you just tell me what the treasure is, Principal, so that I can satisfy my deep love for my mother? If you know, you don't have to go. Aertii shook her head. I don't have the bad taste of prying into other people's secrets. Whether it's a vet or Brett, their treasures are left for students who are fated to find them. I'm already overstepping my boundaries by giving you the treasure map. As for the secret of the treasure, you'll have to find it and decipher it yourself. Decipher it. Dake realized that he had caught on to another keyword. But since the principal of Aertii couldn't provide him with information about the treasure, Dake hoped that she could deliver it as soon as possible and then say goodbye. However, the principal of Aertii seemed to want to treat tonight as a rare leisure time after her busy schedule and kept chatting with him about random things. She was like an old woman who had lived alone for a long time and suddenly caught a child who had mistakenly entered her backyard. She couldn't stop talking. Dake had the mentality of respecting the old and loving the young, so he chatted with her until 10 at night. Suddenly there was a knock on the door. Dake was just wondering who would visit so late at night when he saw the principal of Aertii turn back into a griffin and fly to the top of the cabinet to hide. "Are you a thief?" Dake's mouth twitched, but he still went to open the door. Standing outside the door was the present. Another chapter updated yesterday. A new day after 6. Continue to update yesterday. You're tuning in to the Whispers of Romance YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.